Hey everyone, we're gonna be starting in 5 minutes. So get comfortable, grab a cup of coffee or tea, whatever you like, and we'll start in 5 minutes, 9:15. So we'll see you soon. Hello, everyone. Welcome to NetThing 2020. It is day 2 for us, and I hope you are super excited to see what's coming up. We had a really good day 1, I would say. We went from policy on digital platforms. We also did internet infrastructure security. We also talk about censorship and expression. So there were a lot of takeaways from day 1. And I hope that with the meeting room mode, we can dive a little bit deeper on some of these issues that perhaps caught your attention. We do have some very interesting workshops as well lined up for you. We're going to be kicking it off very shortly, and I'll hand over the mic very shortly. But I just have a few housekeeping items to share with everyone. Firstly, this is a recorded session, so all sessions will be recorded, and we are also live streaming on YouTube. So I believe Cheryl has just dropped the YouTube link for everyone to share far and wide to your networks. Please help us spread the word on that. On the second thing as well, we are still applying our code of conduct. So please, if you haven't done so, read our code of conduct on netthing.org.au. It's available there for you to familiarize yourself on how we really want NetThing to be a safe and inclusive space for all. In addition to that, because this is meeting room mode, I do welcome and encourage everyone to switch on their cameras. So it's a little bit more sociable in this day and age when we can't really see each other physically. It's good to have visible cues as well. And it really helps our facilitators to basically read the energy of the room and see whether they're going too fast or too slow. Do feel free to also use the Zoom chat to connect with the speakers, facilitators, and other participants as well. If you're a little bit shy to switch on your microphone. There will be time where the facilitators throughout the day will ask for people to interact. So a good way to do this to make sure it's not too chaotic is just to essentially raise your hand and they will go by queue. So do feel free to also use the raise your hand button. Let me see. Oh, yes. Apart from that, we also have our NetThing hashtag. So if you have a Twitter account and you would like to share your thoughts or some of the key phrases that you found really interesting from the sessions today, please feel free to use the hashtag NetThing or hashtag NetThing 2020 and continue that conversation on Twitter because that helps with visibility of the event. Last but not least, we also have a photo booth. I love photo booths. Thank you so much, GoDaddy Registry, for providing that photo booth for us. So if you feel happy Friday, take a selfie. Take a selfie of where you're joining us from your home or your office, and take a really nice selfie and share it on Twitter as well, or on your social networks. That would be really good. I don't think I have anything more to say, but once again, welcome everyone to day 2 of NetThing. Please, please, please participate, be engaged. This event is by the community and for the community, so your voice is just as valid as the speakers you saw yesterday, and share your thoughts. You know, there's no I guess there's no stupid questions here. Don't feel like you're asking a noob question because sometimes I feel that way as well. So yes, please be interactive. And let's see what I think I'm going pretty well with time. I won't take up any much more time. But I don't want to kick off too soon, just in case Elliot and Bronwyn isn't ready. How are you guys doing over there?
We're doing good.
We're fine.
Maybe I wonder if anyone has any highlights they'd like to share from yesterday, just before we kick off our first session.
Feel free to raise your hand, ladies and gentlemen, or you can also pop it in the chat. I think Elliot might be looking at the chat as well. So someone said the last panel was extraordinary, got me fired up. That's from Sandy. I really loved the last panel as well. That was super fun. Definitely a good note to end on, the last panel yesterday. Tressa Corbin, lots of great highlights from yesterday. Last panel was fantastic. Anyone else? Oh, please feel free to use your hand. It would be nice to kind of meet a little bit, hear from our participants a little bit more. Oh, Quark Farm, please go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, I think with a lot of us, we belong to tech organizations, and our heads are stuck in the sand with what we're focusing on day to day. You know, trying to deliver solutions for customers and looking at technology. And then every now and then we need to be reminded of the human experience that sits behind the work that we do. So stuff like the last session brings sort of that reality to the forefront, to remind us that, hey, everything that we do, every goal that we try to achieve through our technological pursuits has a human element to it, and there's no purpose to it unless there's people behind the product that actually use it. So I think that's really important to remember. So if anything, you know, the real world situations that are brought up with you know, human experience is a timely reminder from time to time, especially in these times when everything is reliant on technology, but you know, there's real human factors behind it.
Totally agree about the human element as well. I think one of the takeaway, or not takeaway, but I think for me, one of the things that struck me yesterday was the panel at UQ. It was really interesting how strange it is to see everyone in person. And it was really nice to see the speakers bouncing off each other as well. There was a really nice flow to it. And it's quite strange, even though, you know, COVID just happened at the start of the year, but it was so nice to just see that really nice bouncing off of speakers, the nice interaction and between the participants and speakers as well. I thought that was also another highlight for me, especially in the entirety of the program. It was really nice to see that human element as well between speakers and participants, and also how seamless it was to enjoy watching it from this end, from our remote end. Is there anyone else who would like to share? We just have a couple more minutes, so please.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, Alfred.
Yeah, I'm doing a song Sing with Fred. I'm starting a program of tweaking tunes. And I thought of Helen Reddy's song, I Am Woman. You could convert that into I'm a person. Speak to me, listen to me, because I'm hearing you, etc., etc. It's just a thought.
That's so lovely. I love that. Let me see. Pradeep, yes, Pradeep.
Yeah, I thought yesterday's, I mean, the entire day went off pretty well. I was really privileged to listen to that last panel moderated by Yasmin. I thought that was fabulous. And I think there's, you know, I think they, you know, all these panels give us a lot of food for thought, but I think, I think in terms of NetThing itself and in terms of our work in the future, lots of information with respect to should we be a kind of a bridging group, you know, when people come up with these key issues, right? We listen to all these issues, but what do we do next is the big question, right? So yeah, I think yesterday's, that last panel was fabulous. So, yeah.
Thank you, Pradeep. And Pablo, you have your hand raised.
I really liked your panel, Pradeep, and there was this question at the end that you asked about how does this discussion about information and misinformation fits within the internet governance field. And Nick, one of the panelists, answered that what it takes is for example, platforms, but others to feel themselves and take themselves as stakeholders in the conversation. And I think that's the purpose of NetThing, to create that stakeholderism that is needed for taking part in these discussions.
Thanks, Pablo. And Paul, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Look, Pablo made a great point, and Pradeep as well. And it's worth remembering that NetThing is kind of the Australian version of the IGF, which is a global movement, a global system, which in some sense it starts at the top with the global annual IGF meeting, which is, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's a really impressive, huge event, which is supposed to sort of bring together all these issues at the global level. But I think what yesterday showed that in another sense, this process starts at the bottom, at the grassroots, because I think all of the sessions yesterday had a real vitality to them, a real sort of local flavour that was connected, really closely to local issues, with people speaking who were intimately involved with those issues. And I think it's a fantastic example of how the IGF at the local level can be powerful. But the actual point of the system and the openness of the system is that what is discussed at the national level can be presented, and can be presented with real value, both at the regional IGF and at the global IGF too. So this is really, I think, worth bearing in mind, how to feed these issues and find the cross linkages and sort of cross fertilization between the sort of stuff that we heard yesterday and the Australian issues. And I think Australian voices are generally really sort of informed and educated and very well balanced voices to bring into the global system. I think we can really do it if anyone's interested. I hope we'll talk about that today. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. And I'll just read out George Ponga's comment. NetThing helps to highlight the connection between humans and technology, not about how we use it, but how it affects our society and our humanity. And one more from Sandy. One of my key takeouts was Malcolm Crompton, who said the European GDPR is the world's best set of privacy regulations for the 20th century. All right. I think we are doing well with time. So I think let's not further delay the first session, which is a beginner's guide to internet governance. So we have two very awesome facilitators with us today for this session. I would like to introduce Bronwyn and also Elliot. Would you like to introduce yourself?
No problem. Hi, everyone. I'm Elliot. I'm from Melbourne. Currently studying law and computer science at Swinburne here in Melbourne. And, I've been around not for a long time, but good to be here and present this thing to you all.
And hey, I'm Bronwyn. I live in Sydney and I'm currently working in cybersecurity at Microsoft. And I've been around internet governance for maybe 4 years, so I guess I'm still very much a newbie, but I hope that I can help share some of my experiences and maybe get some more young people into the field of internet governance as well.
Yep, so here's our Twitter things, our social media things, if you want to get in touch with us during the session or afterwards. What we're going to do in this session is that we're really going to be looking at how internet governance has evolved. Now, the idea is that there's probably going to be a lot of people at NetThing, young or old, who don't know where this whole internet governance thing is. So what Bronwyn and I have tried to do in this session is we're trying to break it down and talk about some of the really basic sort of issues. So we're going to go over history of the internet, how it all works, what is internet governance in all manners of the word term, how are we going in Australia, how people can get involved, and then we'll have a decent bit of discussion time at the end. If you have any questions during, feel free to chuck them in the chat or put your hand up. I'll be keeping an eye on people putting their hands up and asking questions in chat, and I'll be making a queue so we can go through everybody as we go along.
Yeah, this is designed to be a pretty informal session, so we'll be trying to incorporate a lot more participation, throwing out some questions, and getting your input as well. So it's not just a lecture for the whole the whole session time. So just before we start, it would be good if we can get a feeling for who we've got joining the session today, because I can see some people who've been in internet governance for many years in the participants list. So I want to run a little poll. So if you had to rate your knowledge of internet governance on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being I know absolutely nothing, to 10 being like I'm a pro, I'm an expert, how would you rate yourself? Can you just put in the chat the number that you would kind of rate your knowledge of internet governance and what's roughly involved in that field?
Ooh, good, seeing a wide range of numbers here.
I like that Terry says he's a noob. Pablo says he's 0. Okay, Pablo, we'll try our best to increase our knowledge during this session. It is a beginner session, so I think for those of you who've said 9 or 10, maybe you can contribute, even help us contribute some of your expertise and knowledge into the discussion as well. Thanks so much, everyone, for responding. Can you go to the next slide, Elliot? So we can't really talk about internet governance without understanding a bit about the history of the internet and where this thing called the internet has come from. And I want to give full credit to Sam Dickinson for her fantastic content, which I can't necessarily talk to with the full expertise that she has around talking about the history of the internet. But just really briefly, the internet started as a US Department of Defense research project. And back in 1969, the first communication between 2 nodes occurred, and it was called the ARPANET. So it was a research project running in the University of California, Los Angeles, so UCLA, and it was led by a computer science professor called Leonard Kleinrock. And these 2 nodes between UCLA and the Stanford Research Institute were the first 2 nodes which were part of the original ARPANET. And the first message between the 2 computers was simply the 2 letters LO, which was supposed to be log, L-O-G, but after the guy at UCLA entered the first 2 letters, the network actually crashed. And so that was the very first message sent over the original ARPANET communication. And essentially the function of the original ARPANET was a network for communication between academic and military networks. It was pretty exclusive. It wasn't as widespread as we saw it today. It was very US centric. So you couldn't really do that much either in terms of functionality. As the network sort of increased, there was a few basic applications like Telnet, FTP, and email, and the original, the earliest form of social media, which was these Usenet news groups. Some people here might remember those. I know Sandy was mentioning like memories of news groups yesterday when we were talking about earliest memories of the internet. So can you go to the next slide, Elliot? So as we get into the 1980s, we've got a whole lot of universities and US defense connected into the ARPANET network, and it was essentially managed by the US military. And it wasn't until 1982 that ARPANET officially became the internet. The military asked a couple of computer science scientists, Robert Kahn and Vince Cerf, to create some new networking standards so that they could move the network to more of a decentralized model. And in the 1st of January 1982, they prepared for the switch from the original ARPANET addressing scheme, which is called NCP, to the internet protocol. So the TCP/IP internet standards that we know today. And then in 1983, the ARPANET actually switched to TCP/IP, and that really formed the foundation for the internet as we know it today. And that switchover was complete in 1983. So as the network expanded to a more decentralized network of networks, governance obviously became a whole lot more tricky, because it wasn't just the military and the academia who was involved in running this network. It was a lot more parties involved in that network. So I'd be really interested talking about the history of the internet. What is your first memory of the internet? We're having this great discussion in one of the breakout rooms yesterday afternoon about people's first memory of the internet, and it's really interesting between the different generations hearing about people's first memory, because my first memory was dial-up modems, and I had like an allotted 1 hour per week that I could use the internet without interfering with my family's phone line, and I was accessing like email and really basic social media sort of sites, basic YouTube, whereas some people who got access to the internet much earlier on had an experience of using the internet in more of an academic setting and being able to get abstracts of academic papers and that kind of thing, and somebody else had to use the internet for them. So let's see what we've got in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand as well, and we can let you have it, let you share your experience.
Oh, Andrew, yes.
All right. My father was one of the first computer programmers for the Australian government. So first generation to do any computer programming at all. He worked for the Bureau of Stats. My first memory is in the early 80s, where it was a device, it was a computer keyboard, no screen. It had a magnetic printer, and it did a paper printout, and a phone coupler. So you basically put your phone handset into this little cradle, and it was a dial-up to the University of California, because the Bureau of Statistics was holding data sets there. And so they were doing processing across, and I didn't realize it was the internet. So, you know, early days was of, you know, it was bulletin boards and databases, and this printout that would come one line at a time. And I guess much later, when I was in IT, I went across to the Australian National Gallery, and people from the United States were demonstrating, you know, HTML and so the visual representation of the internet. And we were all working on mainframe, you know, computer programming and a bit of PC stuff. And so seeing these screens pop up, and at that point, everything became different. So that was my two intersections.
Awesome. Lots of good contributions in the chat. Netscape, punch cards, dial-up and chat rooms, love it.
Yeah, I got to say, for me, that the dial-up has got to be my first memory. I think when I was growing up, the dial-up tone ringing through our house probably is my first experience of the internet.
Router configs. I love Hotmail as well. That was like the Hotmail and MSN Messenger. Definitely remember like getting home from school and chatting with friends on MSN.
May I also share
Jeeves.
my memory?
Yep, go ahead.
Alexa is speaking over here. It's slightly a different angle to the memory. I want to share how we subscribed. So I was in high school in 1999. And I remember with my father, we went to the telecommunication office when you go and subscribe to the phone line. And I remember there were a few forms, and we fill in the forms, and it was a great experience of waiting, for the dial-up connection to be established.
Yeah, not like today where we just connect and we expect it to be instantaneous. There's no waiting involved.
Yeah, the process was very interesting, filling in a form with pen and paper and waiting.
Thanks everyone for sharing your memories. We'll have to try and include them somewhere, compile them as part of the report from NetThing. Can you go forward, Elliot? And we'll move on to the next section, which is a little bit about the technical workings of the internet. So just at a really high level, what are the key technologies that are involved in making the internet work? So there are three main key technologies which work together to make the internet work, and they are IP addressing, routing, and DNS. So we're looking at IP addressing, so the unique identification of devices, routing around the transport of packets on the internet, and DNS being translation of domain names to IP addresses. So we'll just go over these in really high level in case you're not aware of how the internet roughly works. Next slide. So the first concept is around IP addressing. So we have to talk about Internet Protocol, which is a protocol invented by Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn back in the original days of the internet, when they were looking at standardizing the way that communication worked between hosts on the internet. So essentially, IP or Internet Protocol is a set of rules and standards for communication. And I guess in a good analogy for Internet Protocol, which I learned about when I was back in university studying networking, was that devices on the internet have addresses similar to like an address, like a physical address of your house, and that's used to uniquely identify that device and allow another device on the internet to send it some information. And the internet's been using Internet Protocol or IP version 4 since 1983. The original Internet Protocol. Just click forward, Elliot. And the problem we had with that was that the original Internet Protocol only used 32 bits, which means that there is a maximum of 4 billion addresses. And we've hit the point now where there's more devices on the internet than what IP protocol version 4 was originally designed for. So we're getting to this, we've run into this problem called IPv4 exhaustion. And people today with IoT and many devices, we have multiple devices now with public IP addresses, there's a real need for more IP addresses. So essentially, a new version of IP was developed called IPv6, which uses 128 bits hexadecimal format, which means that there is a maximum number of, I can't even actually say that number because it's so huge, but it's like my networking tutor at university essentially explained it as like the number of grains of sand on all the beaches in the world. So it's a really huge number of IP addresses in IPv6. And IPv6 also has some extra security benefits, and it works slightly differently as well. So definitely worth having a look into that. Next slide. So the next technology that makes the internet work is routing. So that means that it's basically the transport mechanism for how we're sending a packet from one host to another host over on a different network. And it's usually done by devices called routers. And the internet uses a protocol called Border Gateway Protocol, or BGP, to look at all the available paths that the data could travel and pick the best route. So if you're sending a packet to the US or to Europe, then BGP is going to be used along the way to get your packet to its final destination. And there's been some really interesting work around security of the internet routing protocols, because BGP, it relies on trust between the different routers and autonomous systems, we call them, along the way to the destination, which allows an attack called BGP hijacking, which is an interesting read if you like security like I do. Next slide. And the last aspect of the technical element, technical concepts around the internet is the domain name system. So how does your computer know the IP address of a website when you type that website URL into the browser? There is a whole system behind translating that human readable domain name into a IP address that the machine or the server behind the scenes will understand. So DNS is a hierarchical distributed database. It consists of 13 root servers labeled A to M, which there's actually many of each of those root servers around the world to make sure that we have a lot of resiliency built into the DNS system. And there's different sort of levels in that hierarchical database, including like top level domains. We've got like country domains like the .au, .nz, those kind of things. And then you've got generic TLDs as well, like your .com, .net, .org. And something which was a bit of a revelation for me was that these are run by companies that are authorized to host. There's like certain companies that are authorized to host, say, the .au domain name. So you can't necessarily buy a .au domain name anywhere in the world. That ALDA, who's one of our sponsors for this conference, is sort of the party who's accredited to allow people to register .au domain names. So I'm interested if anyone from ALDA who's on the call has any expertise to share around, specifically around TLDs.
What's the question? All the names, the whole namespace is, sorry, my name's Peter Orphan, I'm one of the directors at ALDA. The whole namespace is administered by an organisation called ICANN, and they delegate portions of the namespace out to other entities. And for any names ending .au, that country code top level domain, they delegate that through the Australian government, as it were, to ALDA. So we are officially endorsed by the centralised body, ICANN, that manages all the namespace to allocate names that end in .au.
Thanks, Peter. Yep. So ALDA's the authorised party to look after the .au namespace as delegated by ICANN. So we'll be talking about ICANN a little bit more later in the presentation. Elliot's got some more content on that section. So let's move on to the next slide.
All
so
right.
I'll hand it over to Elliot now.
Hi everyone, Elliot back again. So we know what the internet is and how it was made, coming out of America with the, the academic side and the military side. But as it's gone more global, and as we're talking about a network of networks that propagates overseas and is truly global, who makes the rules? Particularly outside of all the things about political and social issues with the internet. On a technical level, who makes those standards? On a technical level, who decides where everything fits? And so that's kind of what I want to dive into now. But so more generally, when we're talking about governance, some of the things you might think of are things like this, like courts. For us in Australia, it's a big, ugly postmodern building in Canberra, where they make the rules, and those rules are propagated, throughout the land. But that's really a central point of authority. Things like legislative branches, things like the parliament, they make rules through some sort of democratic process, but they write them up and they send them out, and that's now the rules, that's now the law. Or on a more local level, you might be looking at things like company boards, where people get around a table and make rules about how companies are run. Corporate governance is a big hot topic in Australia at the moment. But again, these are all one jurisdiction. For a court, it's the court's jurisdiction. For Parliament, it's the area over which Parliament has sovereignty. And for a company, it's the company. And so in Australia, for example, our system of governance comes from Canberra. It comes from the states and territories, but that's about it. And talking about the internet on a global level, the internet at the moment isn't something that is necessarily split on a country level. It's not something that's split on a state level. It's not something split on a company level. There are certain controls that those people can put in place. But when we're talking about the internet as a whole, well, then you're talking about, something beyond all of these normal systems of governance. So these are all formal governance systems which bring together a society, and the society might be the court, it might be the company, it might be the country. And that's how society gets together to make decisions about how things are going to be run. So it's kind of straightforward. But when we're talking about internet governance, well, then it becomes a little bit more complicated. So WGIG, United Nations Forum, set up a while ago to tackle this issue of where does the internet's policy-making, decision-making come from, and where does it go? So their interpretation of internet governance, remembering governance is about making rules and everything, it's about the development and application by governments, private sector, civil society in their roles of shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and use of the internet. Now, what you'll note here is there's multiple stakeholders, or what we like to call multi-stakeholder model. So we're talking about what governments can do, and normally, governments run by themselves. Private sector, civil society, these are all people who use the internet, and they all have an interest in the internet coming together. And this is where we're talking about respective roles, but they all share principles, norms, and so on and so forth. So the difference with internet governance, aside from how it actually works, but on a conceptual level, the way it's different is that you are bringing together all these different stakeholders, and they make decisions together, and including all the different difficulties in that. So there's two elements to this, and a distinction I really like is the distinction between governance of the internet, like the internet as a thing, as a technical thing, and governance on the internet, which we'll talk about in a sec. So governance of the internet is the internet as a thing, as a network. And so that's internet technical administration and management, setting internet standards. So that's things like the Internet Engineering Task Force, which set a lot of the standards around the internet. And things like the regional internet registries, which handle a lot of the things around the IP addresses. Those are all kind of stakeholder groups that deal with how the internet works at a technical level, and making sure things like when Bronwyn was talking about BGP hijacking, that that sort of stuff doesn't happen too often. So yes, this is things like the IP addresses, routing numbers, DNS systems, domain names, internet stuff on a technical level. And ICANN's in there as well, because they handle a lot of the DNS stuff. And then on the internet standard side, you have things like W3C, Internet Engineering Task Force, ISO, and that's really setting out globally, and these are pretty normal processes globally, what technically goes into the internet. Now, on the flip side, getting away from the internet as a technical thing, we have to talk about what's on the internet. And so here we're worrying about things like, things that predate the internet. When we're talking about press, and we're talking about free speech, these are issues that existed years upon years ago. And the internet, because it's comparatively easy to use and accessible to everybody, kind of exacerbates these issues and makes them worse. So when we're talking about the issues that exist but are only getting worse because of the internet, it's not a case of fixing it for the internet. You know, you might be trying to fix hate speech on the internet. Well, unfortunately, the first step to fixing hate speech on the internet might unfortunately be fixing hate speech everywhere, which is a lot more difficult than just focusing on the internet bit. And so internet services are cross-border, global, as we talked about earlier, which can make it difficult to solve these issues because a lot of these things are, you know, governments, especially in Australia, would like to fix these sorts of things by just passing a law. And unfortunately, with the internet, it's a bit more complicated than that because it can affect everybody around the world. So you need a global approach fitting in with the internet and a multi-stakeholder approach because everybody uses the internet. And so some of these internet issues that are occurring are things like access to the internet around the world, diversity and inclusion. And those two things really go into this universal acceptance. So Bronwyn was talking earlier about you know, domain names, and most of the domain names that you're probably familiar with are probably all in Latin script, so using Latin characters and everything. But there's a big push and a rightful push to extend that to other character sets. And that's what universal acceptance is all about. And part of all that is expanding the internet and making it reflect diversity and inclusion around the world. Openness, security, perennial issues with any form of technology anywhere. Privacy, human rights, again, perennial issues, but they need the internet reflects it. The internet reflects whatever the other issues are happening in society. So that's a bit of a easy look at what the internet governance space is and some of the issues in that. We'll talk more specifically about the actors in a second, but we thought that for the moment, what we might do is we'll talk about, for each of us, why we're involved in internet governance and the internet space, to give an idea of exactly, you know, what this space actually practically looks like. So I'll hand over to Bronwyn to talk about her journey.
Thanks, Elliot. Just note there's a few things you'll need to click, so I'll just let you know when to click. So my interest in the internet originally sparked, I think, when I was quite young and starting to use the internet, and my family moved abroad to do some aid and development work when I was about 7 years old, and we were living in Papua New Guinea, and the internet was one of the main ways that my family could maintain contact with friends and relatives back in Australia. And I saw this real power of the internet to facilitate that communication and allow us to reach people regardless of where they were. So that interest really, it stayed with me for a long time, even through my school years and going into university and the workforce. I always was really curious about technology and the internet as this global connector. So I went on and studied networking in university, and I was working in cybersecurity as well. And it wasn't until a few years later that I came across something just randomly online, like a fellowship program from the Internet Society, which was an opportunity to attend the global IGF in Geneva in 2017. And I went through their training program. It was called the Youth at IGF Fellowship. I went through this training program around internet governance and covered sort of the technical aspects, some of the policy aspects, and that really prepared me to go along to the Internet Governance Forum in 2017, where I saw all these stakeholders coming together and talking about internet issues, governance on the internet, governance of the internet. And that was fascinating to me, seeing people from so many different backgrounds and countries and stakeholder groups coming together and talking about what is the future of the internet? How do we govern this thing? And so many interesting issues which I hadn't even thought about myself. So that was my first kind of foray into internet governance back in 2017. Next. click. So then after that, I went on to be involved in the Asia Pacific Internet Governance Academy in 2018 and 2019, which is a youth training and development program run by ICANN and APNIC and a few other stakeholders in the Asia Pacific region, specifically for youth, to develop youth capability and knowledge in internet governance within the Asia Pacific region. And that was a fantastic experience to get grow my knowledge and also develop more of a network of young people who are really interested in internet policy. So I'm really passionate about seeing young people come up through the ranks and contribute to internet policy as well. So that was a great forum to kind of build those networks and experience. Next click. And then following on from that, I also went on to attend the ICANN 64 Community Forum in Kobe back in 2019 to see, I got exposure to how the ICANN processes work around the DNS system and attended some interesting sessions, particularly like the GAC session, the Government Advisory Committee, hearing how the governments were talking about internet policy. And back then they were talking about the .amazon TLD case, which there was a little bit of a conflict between like the South American countries who are like actually who have the Amazon River and the Amazon rainforest like in that area, and the Amazon, the tech company, trying to decide who would actually get to manage that top level domain name. So it's interesting hearing the government perspectives there. And I also went along to the Apricot and APNIC conference in Melbourne earlier in the year as well, which is more of a technical conference, and there was lots of interesting technical discussions there. So there's so many different forums in internet governance that you can get involved in depending on what you're interested in. That's something that I really enjoy, getting to kind of hang out with my technical crowd when I'm interested, when I want to kind of relate to what they're talking about, but then also getting to hear different perspectives from other stakeholders. Next click. And then more recently, in the past few years, I've also been working with the NetThing steering committee and helping to organise the past couple of events we've had. So that's been a fantastic experience, getting more involved in internet governance at a local scale. So moving Australia's internet governance community along and helping create these interesting multi-stakeholder discussions and forums.
Cool. So I did something somewhat similar to Bronwyn. I originally got into internet governance, it's probably 2 years ago, about 2 years ago now, so I'm studying at Swinburne, and Swinburne Law School has a big focus on intellectual property. So one of our professors emailed me and said, oh, you're studying computer science and you're into the intellectual property stuff. And they had gotten an email from the International Trademarks Association saying, oh, if there's anyone who's interested in computer science, be sure to send them on to this ICANN NextGen program. Me having my experience with ICANN was my networking classes where I learned about how the DNS system worked on a very technical level. In any case, I was very fortunate enough to get to go to the ICANN Community Forum as a NextGen Pro candidate person, where I had just come off a year studying in Indonesia, where I had seen myself the power of the internet as a development tool. I mean, I went on holiday in like remote island places, and there are people organizing their fishing loads based off their phone on the internet and organizing everything based off that. And that's a fantastic tool that didn't exist 10 years ago. So anyway, I went to the ICANN forum not knowing much. And what I got out of it was, wow, I learned that there was this whole universe of internet governance stuff, which for me seemed right at the intersection of what I was interested in terms of law and computer science. So at the ICANN Community Forum, I don't feel like I actually contributed much during there because I was just trying to take it all in. But I was fortunate enough to meet with a lot of people who, like Bronwyn, who had been to the Asia Pacific Internet Governance Academy in the year before. I applied for it and fortunately, again, was allowed to be accepted. And the beautiful thing about APIGA is that it assumes no knowledge. It starts from the base level of how does the internet work, and it works your way up to the point where you're discussing these issues in a fantastic forum with great young people who are experienced in all these policy issues. So, and then that's where I really got excited about the possibility of internet policy making on a technical level and on a more high level. And from that, again, the people I'd met from all of these things, I went to the Internet Governance Forum last year in Berlin as part of the Internet Society Youth Ambassadors program that Bronwyn did in 2017. And I also was fortunate enough to be a speaker on a panel there about youth engagement in internet governance. And again, my favorite thing about the Internet Governance Forum was the fact that you get all the people into the one room and anybody can go, anybody can talk to them. I mean, it was absolutely phenomenal for me that I could go up to, I think it was like the Israeli Data Protection Commissioner and just ask questions and chat. And you could do that across everyone. Like I was talking to people who had been there right at the start of the internet. And that's just an opportunity that I feel you don't get anywhere else. And that's for me really the beauty of this whole, the Internet Governance Forum and the whole process where it is multi-stakeholder. So you do get everybody into the one room. I was also, while I was in Europe, I double dipped and I went to the Winter School of Internet Governance last year as well, which was similar to APIGA, but even more focused on the big issues, the governance on the internet stuff. So that's talking about, the big issues like hate speech there and digital inclusion and everything. But I started off, in 12 months, effectively, I went from not knowing anything to being able to participate in these discussions. And I think that's one of the things I really enjoy about this whole ecosystem, this whole community, is that everyone get involved and everybody can have their say.
I'm going to talk pretty quickly now about Australia's internet governance ecosystem, just to give you an overview of what the local landscape looks like. So next slide. There's quite a few different stakeholders involved at a local level within Australia. We should probably even have NetThing on this slide as well, to be honest, and this is not by any means comprehensive. But some of the different types of stakeholders that exist in the Australian internet governance community are stakeholders like from the government side, who are formally responsible for internet governance in a government capacity, are agencies like the Department of Communications and the Arts, and they have representatives who come along and sit on committees at ICANN, like the Government Advisory Committee, and they will contribute Australia's perspective in those forums and act on behalf of Australia. We also have other stakeholders like the technical community. Obviously, ISPs and telcos are a key stakeholder in managing the technical aspects of how the internet functions in Australia and making sure that it's accessible to people in the Australian community. We have a pretty unique technical challenge in terms of the size of Australia and people living in remote areas who perhaps rely on things like satellite internet. Even the access to the internet is definitely still a recurring issue we have in Australia, and things like NBN as well are helping to extend that a little bit more and upgrade the internet from a technical level, a technical perspective. We've got stakeholders like civil society groups such as Internet Australia and Electronic Frontiers Australia, Digital Rights Watch as well. Lizzie O'Shea was on one of the panels yesterday, and she brings some fantastic civil society perspective into these kind of discussions. We have private sector, companies like Amazon and Google and the whole Digi group, which is a sort of a consortium of private sector technology companies. they're also a key stakeholder. We have academia, universities, researchers, and groups who are involved both on a technical level of researching how the internet works and the protocols, as well as researching issues. Like we had the group from UQ talking about misinformation yesterday, which is a really good example of that governance on the internet and those kind of issues, using the sort of abuse of those platforms. And lastly, we have the IP address and domain name administrators. So organizations like APNIC, which is our regional internet registry, are looking at internet number allocations, and OUDA looking after our .au domain name administration. So all of these stakeholders work together within the multi-stakeholder ecosystem to make decisions about Australia's internet governance. And probably what's sort of missing is just the average person like you and I, who we're also empowered in the multi-stakeholder ecosystem to contribute our perspective and our voice, regardless of which stakeholder group we identify with, and help to push internet policy forward to make sure that it does represent the diversity of the Australian population, because it is such a diverse population. We're not one consolidated group of voices who all think the same thing. We are such a diverse nation. So that's just a quick overview of what the ecosystem looks like from our perspective. Next slide. So how can you get involved? That's probably a major question a major point we wanted to bring out in this session, is that anyone can really get involved in internet governance. It's not this exclusive club. And we want to make it also really clear that young people are also a key stakeholder in internet governance as well. And there are actually programs which are designed specifically to help young people to understand internet governance and get involved in this community. So some of the programs which Elliot and I have been involved in so far have been fellowship programs like the Internet Society Youth Ambassador Program, the Asia Pacific School of Internet Governance, and the APIGA program as well, which unfortunately didn't run this year. There's also an initiative called Youth for IG, which is a Asia Pacific group of youth who are really interested in internet governance, and it's run by youth for youth to help uplift youth knowledge around internet governance and engagement. There is the NetThing committee, so we are always looking for diverse representation within the NetThing committee, so definitely get in contact if you're interested in getting involved. There are technical conferences, so for example, APRICOT, network operator groups like OSNOG, and APNIC conferences as well. And from a civil society perspective, there are multiple different groups like Electronic Frontiers Australia, Digital Rights Watch, Internet Australia, which you can get involved in as well, and participate in their events and discussions. So that's just a few examples. Elliot, did you have any other ideas or tips on how to get involved?
Oh no. Yeah, look, and I think the best way, and what I always say to people at my university and otherwise, is that you have to apply to these things to get involved. I think a lot of people, I know at my university, are quite nervous about applying to things like the ICANN fellowships or the IGF program because I don't know anything about internet governance. But if everybody thought that, then nobody would apply. I mean, everybody's got to start somewhere. So certainly, and even things like the NetThing committee and all these civil society groups, you can just join up and learn as you go. And especially in areas like ICANN, IETF, it can be as simple as just joining a mailing list and following as you go along and chipping in where you feel confident. So the barrier for entry seems intimidating, but there are areas where you can just slip in and observe and learn as you go.
And the great thing about participating in these kind of fellowship programs is often there is a training component where you'll learn the basics of internet governance, as well as a mentorship component where you'll be able to ask questions to someone who's been involved in the community for a while. For example, in the IGF Youth Ambassador Program, there's a facilitated set of workshops and like to prepare you to go to the IGF. And then when you're at the IGF as well, usually you get paired up with someone who's been in the community for a while, who is able to explain what's going on and help to answer your questions while you're there. So you're not just kind of dropped into this unfamiliar territory and kind of trying to figure it out by yourself. You're really guided through the process, and someone's there alongside you to help you learn as you go. So those kind of programs I can't recommend enough.
Sure. All right. So now we're going to move into, we've got about half an hour of discussion time. This is deliberately unstructured. We've got 3 sort of prompt questions, but don't feel bound by them. These are just kind of, they're guidelines, not rules. Chuck your hand up on Zoom if you have any particular thoughts. Use the HTML question tag in chat. I will try to keep up a queue of who's chucking their hands up and putting questions in chat, and try to keep it within 2 minutes so everybody can have their say. So first question, what does internet governance mean? Very generally, what does it mean to you? Does it work? Should this be something that should be handled on a government level? I think a lot of people will have particular views on this, but also, you know, is the current system making internet users' views heard? Things like the Internet Governance Forum, as we spoke about, they're looking at evolving it and making changes. So it's always up for review. So be sure to chuck your questions in chat or chuck your hand up. Paul, I see you have your hand up.
Hi everyone. Thanks for this, Bronwyn and Elliot. Look about what internet governance means. I think it's worth just going back to the origin of the popular use of the term, which is relatively recent. It really came about in the early 2000s out of this UN process, which was called the World Summit on Information Society. This was sort of when governments were starting to get really interested in what was happening in the ICT, information communications technology sort of sphere. And this big UN summit was about how governments could sort of make best use and bring their societies into the information age, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a big deal that went on for 4 years. But by about halfway through, what was apparent was that this was not just about ICT or even just about communications generically, but it was actually about the internet. And so the internet sort of came up, I think, sort of again and again and again as this critical thing that was going to be critical to ICTs, to the information society. And what the effect of that was, this was a governmental meeting, and if governments hear that something is important, you know, their obsession is governance. Their obsession is, well, if this thing is important, how is it governed? We've got to know. And they set up a group halfway through the WSIS to say, what is internet governance all about? And that group went away and deliberated and came back in the second half of the meeting and said, yes, internet governance is this thing. It's very important. It's why the internet, the reason the internet is so successful is because of the way the internet's governed. It kind of discovered internet governance and put a name to it. And it also discovered something else, which is called the multi-stakeholder model. So part of the report of this group was to say, well, internet governance is a good thing. And it's part of that is the multi-stakeholder model, and we've got to do X, Y, Z to keep it going, which was quite enlightened. It was quite good. But both of those things, internet governance and the multi-stakeholder model, were discoveries. They were discoveries of what actually was the working modality of the internet. It was how the internet worked and how the internet had become successful. So, I mean, certainly not with capital letters. Internet governance didn't really exist as a term before. It was just a phrase, you know, because governance, of course, doesn't mean governments. It can mean, you know, like moderation and the sort of gentle control or guidance that you get out of, say, a governor on an engine. But I think one of the things, and I really think that we should be aware of this, is that internet governance is still a problematic term. It's actually very problematic in some languages, because in some languages, the only thing that governs is a government. That's it. So internet governance is translated into something that is done by governments, and that's not the case at all. But even in English, people sort of gather that that governance has to be done by a governmental agency of some kind. It's national or it's local or it's state-based or whatever, and that's just not the case, because internet governance, such as it is, has been in the hands of a lot of distributed governance processes. If it's in the hands of governmental agencies or governance agencies, those agencies run and sort of steward governance processes in ways that governments actually don't. Bottom-up consensus-based processes is not the way governance normally happens by governments. So I just think we'd be in a better position completely if we hadn't settled on internet governance at all, if we'd called it something like internet cooperation, because that's actually what it is, or if there was some term other than governance. I think it was a mistake at the time, but as long as we know as long as we really can be clear on what it means, I think that's okay. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point around the translation of the word governance, and even the word governance to different audiences. Even in English, sounds very formal and government-like. So I like the different suggestions for alternatives, like cooperation or stewardship or something like that. Maybe that can be something we can bring up in one of those forums in the future. Maybe a good point to raise in the IGF discussion at the end of the year. What are we going to call the IGF now? the Internet Cooperation Forum. Did anyone else want to contribute anything in answering these questions we've got on the screen? I can see there's a few messages in the chat as well. Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to speak.
I think we'll go Peter, and then Kwok will go to you after.
Thanks. I think one of the aspects of the multi-stakeholder environment, it's sometimes less multi-stakeholder and more multi-motivation, and trying to understand that all of the players that are in the internet space or deriving value from the internet and its capabilities are doing so because they have wildly different motivations. And some of them are operating in ways that a lot of modern Western democracies would find a little disturbing. So some nation states want better control of the internet to have better visibility to what their citizens do. Some nation states want to ensure the internet is a great place to do business so their economies can grow. And Bronwyn just wants to be able to communicate with the rest of her family when she lives in Papua New Guinea. And things that are important to her as an individual, and multiple nation states. Oh, and by the way, there are a whole bunch of companies making a very large amount of money out of the internet, and how do you align all those? And so this is, for me personally, why this space is so incredibly interesting. It's incredibly complicated, and it's the ultimate example of never assume what you're thinking is what everyone else is thinking. Everyone will show up with a different point of view and a different perspective. And the great challenge here is, how do we try to get most of the people happy most of the time? Because it's very easy, it's very hard and very challenging to do that. But that is the fundamental challenge, is that everyone's involved for different reasons in this thing called the internet. And of course, we have different definitions. Is it the holy trinity of routing, addressing, and DNS? Well, for a lot of people, the internet is you type something into this Google thing and you connect, and that's the internet. So it's really, I think it's a really interesting space to be involved in, because it's extremely complicated and requires you to always be thinking, what why is that stakeholder or that motivation? How does that work? And how can I try and align that and bring that on board? So just a personal observation on why this is an interesting space.
Sure. I think a lot of the things that I've picked up is certainly around, it's such a big space. It's hard to define, and you've got to get everybody in. It's very hard to find some sort of single line of thought going through it all. Cock, we'll go to you, and then Jeff's answer in the chat, question in the chat.
Thanks, Elliot. Internet cooperation, or the involvement in internet cooperation, aka internet governance, it's by and large a volunteer position. Obviously, there are some organizations out there that get involved, or individuals that get involved that have a reason from a commercial perspective. But, you know, by and large, everyone participates at ICANNs or ITFs or, you know, NetThing, for example. All of this is volunteer time. So and that's where it's really important for the people that do get involved, is that there's a recognition of that, is that, you know, you're giving up your own time to cooperate and try to make the landscape better for everyone else with whatever goals and views that you have. Which then leads into the next question that you have down there: are the views of individual internet users heard? Now, I'm generalizing a lot here, but a lot of this stuff is beyond the comprehension of a lot of internet users. The technology behind it, the systems that communicate, even a domain name. I've tried to explain to my parents what I do, and they still have no idea. I think they still think I install ATM machines somewhere, which I've never done in my life. But anyway, it's the comprehension of the general internet users that prevent, or is a barrier for people to get involved. But it doesn't mean that their views don't count. What matters then is someone or some organization that can represent their views in these forums. And then I think that's where the hard part is, right? With all the sessions that we've heard yesterday with you know, the blocking of Instagram pictures because of algorithms that determine something, right? Technology is not evil, it's or bad. It's sort of the coding that goes into it. There's a human element that gets coded into that, and also the outcome of it as well. So so I think that's the biggest challenge with internet cooperation or governance is the people factor. It's the level of comprehension is number one. The giving up of your time to want to pursue this outside of your own daily lives is number two. So yeah, that's my input.
Really good points, and I can agree that it is quite a significant time investment on the volunteer side as well, even for initiatives like NetThing, where we're all volunteers putting together this event in our free time around our day jobs. So we need to recognise all the volunteers and that effort that goes into making internet governance work for people who aren't doing this as their full-time job. There was a great question by Jeff Miller in the chat about like the splintering of the internet. So I'll just read it out. It's been suggested that the logical extension of China's controls on internet use would be the internet splitting into at least two largely disjunct networks. Any comments? So I'm interested to see whether there's anyone on the call who has any particular insights into this concept we would refer to as the balkanization of the network. So splintering off into little sub-networks rather than being one global single internet. Does anyone have anything you'd like to contribute to that discussion? Pablo, let's go, Pablo.
In these times of pandemic and cyber risks and geopolitical intensity, what apparently has gotten more attention, not more power, is this multilateral state-centric arena of what Jeff mentioned, fragmentation due to cyber sovereignty initiatives and more control, as others have said in the chat room. But either, I mean, these times, and Jeff put a very drastic apocalyptic scenario of internet being governed either by big players or by governments playing war games. And And the old multi-stakeholder governance of the internet that Elliot mentioned, with that history of community-driven policies for the internet domains and addresses, seems to be getting quite old. But what is it that will replace that? What is it that will be able to oppose that shift towards more multilateralism, state-centric, and more power-grabbing monopolistic behaviors? And there is no other alternative but that community collective action to be able to have enough pressure and have substance in its discussion to be able to put forward a model that is more multidisciplinary and more stakeholder balanced in that approach. And I think that comes with our great responsibility of fostering that movement, isn't it? This movement, I mean.
I think we'll go to Keith and then we'll move on to the next question.
Sorry, I don't know why I've actually got panel privileges for this one, because I'm actually part of the next one. So I've had my video off the whole time. I was involved in a lot of conversations when I was in the department around this issue. My only observation, for what it's worth, is that it's been technically possible to fragment the internet for a long time. Many nations have had the capacity to set up an internet-like thing within their own national boundaries for at least a decade or more. Balkanization is already a fact to some extent, but the worldwide internet as we know it will continue to exist and continue to be used for as long as it is in people's widespread economic and social interest for it to do so. So there'll be a constant pull towards balkanization by governments who want to control everything, and a constant pressure back in the other direction for those who want to exploit all of the opportunities, both commercial, social, and economic, which arise from that. So this will keep going for a long time. That's really all I wanted to say.
That's a really good point about the economic and social benefits, and then also the benefits to, I guess, the government of that control and censorship. So they're sort of on two different ends of the spectrum. So they need to decide which they want, which is of higher priority to them. Like countries like Iran, for example, which are they have a lot more censorship, but perhaps that cuts them off from the economic and social benefits of the internet and being connected into that global network. So let's go on to the next question.
Yeah, so, excuse me. So here we wanted to focus a bit back on in Australia. What does internet governance look like in Australia? We're seeing it, we're here at the moment and we're seeing it with NetThing. But internet policy making in general in Australia, I'm sure everybody would have very strong opinions on the state of that. And then also representation in the internet governance, forums, ICANN, everything. Is Australia underrepresented in those forums? Is the state of internet governance in Australia reflect how internet governance is going overseas? I'd be really interested to hear everyone's thoughts, because everywhere else I've gone with internet governance over the last year and a half has been everywhere else in the world, and I haven't had to make much emphasis on Australia except for the fact that I'm from Australia. So I'd be, with so many experienced people on this call, I'd be very interested to hear people's thoughts on Australia and internet governance. Thanks, Cheryl, and then we'll go to Paul.
Thanks, Elliot. Cheryl Langton, and I'm going to, I guess, quote history and also make a note to future here in response to your question. Historically, Australia has, in inverted commas, punched well above its weight across all of the fora that we would traditionally think of as being involved in the internet ecosystem, let alone internet governance. And we don't have to go back too far to see what looked like almost an Australian takeover of the leadership of huge swathes in this area. So I think we actually are very well reflected, and our voice is, more importantly, trusted and well heard. And huge amounts of Keith's time when he was working in the department, of course, was in fact acting in this trusted voice role in many of these fora. So he can speak more to that. But I think we're also continuingly in good stead, because whilst we may not have the numbers that you may see coming from certain areas, certain delegations, what we have is great deal of effectiveness, and that counts for a lot. So if you've got one or two people who are genuinely acting in the best interests of a larger group and are reflecting the views, even if they're diverse views, from the community that they are coming from, in this case, Australia, internet users, I think that that's a very powerful thing. And that's certainly something that I see with the likes of you and Bronwyn as a strong thing in the future as well. Thanks.
For sure. And I think that's true, actually. I hadn't necessarily reflected on that it's not necessarily how many people you have going to these things, but it's what the people you do have, what they do. So I think that's a really good point. Paul?
Yeah, I was just going to make the point that internet governance itself, as I think you actually hit earlier on in the session, actually means different things to different people, and there's different fora in which that happens. In terms of inclusiveness, I think the policy making around the internet, how it works, more of the technical parts of the internet, probably is relatively inclusive, but there's a lot of policy work about behavior on the internet, how people do things on the internet, which you would have to argue is not inclusive at all. And the example for that is the abhorrent content laws that came in due to the massacre in New Zealand, where there was absolutely no consultation or any sort of even policy making. That was a very much an internet related event that people think of as the internet, but was actually someone's behavior using the internet as a platform. And in that case, that policy was effectively imposed from on high in a matter of days, in a very paternalistic type of manner. So I think it's important to recognize that there are many forms of governance, many forums in which governance happens. Some people are active in all of them, some people are active in one of them, and you can have things happening in one forum that are actually invisible and unknown to people who think all the action is happening over here. Drawing all those threads together of all the different forms and layers of governance is actually itself quite a role.
Thanks, Paul. We might need to, in the interest of time, just move on to the next question. We have one final question and we've only got around 6 minutes left. So we just want to make sure that we get through everything before the end of the session.
I know Paul Wilson has had his hand up, so Paul, we'll let you have your say on this one before we move on.
Look, that's what I just wanted to quickly say. I agree with Cheryl that the Australian government has been historically really good, at least for the last couple of decades. I'm familiar with, but that's actually changed recently. I mean, the Australian government participation in the international internet governance processes has gone way down, and it's left a big void. But Australia has also got a big void, and I think this actually comes from the kind of apathy that comes from us having a very sort of well-advanced governmental system. That's a void at the level of NGOs, and I can say from personal experience across many countries that the Australian non-government sector is seriously underrepresented in internet governance discussions. That in many countries you can find media organisations, activist community organisations, women's organisations, educational action groups, a whole stack of different NGOs being directly involved with internet governance discussions at the national level, and that I'm afraid has really been absent in Australia. And I think I really do think the Australian government has changed its behaviour in recent years, and that has kind of left a void that isn't yet being filled by the Australian NGO sector. So I'd love to see a way where we could get out of a kind of what might be a sort of an apathy or a lack of engagement in this, because really I just don't think, you know, organisations like Choice, for instance, Australian Consumers, really they've had very little involvement, and I'd love to see more. Thanks.
Great point. So third point, near and dear to Bronwyn's heart, and I know Jennifer Fung is on the call from NetMission. She'll have hot takes on this as well. But the role of young people in internet governance, and not just young people, but also I know at the IGF last year that I was at, a big discussion was about underrepresented people more generally. You know, are we reaching out to underserved demographics in internet governance more generally? And I know this takes multiple forms, because, for example, I know with the ICANN APAC space, we have like regular calls, and a constant complaint is a lot of these internet governance things aren't held during a good time zone. So, you know, things like that, that's inclusivity. So, you know, what are people's thoughts about inclusiveness and young people and all that into the ecosystem? Paul, is your hand up for this again?
I don't.
No. Okay, Cheryl.
As someone who could arguably be said works through a number of time zones, usually 24/7 and sometimes several days in a row, catching catnaps around, I do know a little bit about this pressure of being a volunteer in the space. But actually, I think that the whole potential for greater diversity of people getting involved, and particularly those that are not, you know, as ancient as I am and with a great deal more energy, you know, youth comes immediately to mind, should allow us to have much better coverage and work through. I mean, trust me, I hear the gaming that goes on in the rest of my house. I know there are family members in the under 40, under 30 and under 20 spectrum that are awake while I'm on meetings, you know, because I can hear the games going on. So, you know, they could just as easily be awake and having something, if they're excited about it, to forward the diversity of voice that we need in these things relating to internet governance. But the very well, and so credit where credit is due, is we can start to take things into our own region, talk locally in more friendly, both time zone and culturally ways, and then take that back with someone or a few people, feeding that into those larger discussions and those wider forum with all that horrible time zoning. Thanks.
Thanks, Cheryl. We're almost out of time. I really agree with a lot of the points that have been raised so far, especially making sure that internet governance discussions and forums are accessible, whether that's from a time zone perspective, a language perspective, an age appropriateness perspective as well, making sure that we're speaking at a level that different people can understand if they're coming into the community for the first time. And within the APAC region as well, I think some of the groups like Youth for IG, which have been created specifically for youth by youth as well, are movements which can have an enormous impact and also provide peer support for young people coming into the space and helping them to understand what's going on and then start to engage in these kind of forums. Those kind of groups are really important as well. So big plug to Youth for IG, to any young people 30 or I think 35 or under, to come and just like Google Youth for IG and come and join. And we have a great WhatsApp group and community as well. So we're probably going to wrap up now, and we'll hand back over to Melody to continue with emceeing the NetThing program. Thanks everyone who came along to our session, and for everyone who participated. Really appreciate your participation and questions.
Well done, thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Ellen.
Any last words, Elliot?
No, I think it was really good to hear from everyone about what they thought about everything, and glad we could hopefully shed some light on this field for some of the newcomers here. But otherwise, looking forward to continuing our discussions over the rest of today.
Thanks, Bronwyn and Elliot. That was a really great session. I hope to see in the coming NetThing as well, seeing more young people leading sessions. So this was really good. We're going to take a 15-minute break. Please go do whatever you need to do, and then we will start again at 11 a.m. for DNS abuse. So that's what's coming up next. In the meantime as well, we've been having a bit of fun with GoDaddy's registry for the booth. So if you haven't checked that out, please give it a go. It's been really fun. We've used a couple of the boomerangs and also some of the filters as well. So do snap a selfie and share it with us on the Twitters, #NetThing, or on your other social media networks. Yeah, that's it from me. We'll see you at 11 a.m. Hi, Donna. Hi, Donna, Chris, Catherine. You can test your audio if you like before we begin in a short while.
Hi, Melody. It's Donna. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely. Very clear.
Terrific.
Hi, it's Catherine. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Beautiful.
Chris here.
Awesome. I think everyone looks and sounds good. So we'll start in a few minutes.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Catherine. Long
Hi,
time no see.
Keith, indeed. Good to see you. Looking
Indeed.
well.
Oh, thank you. So are you.
Thanks.
Hello guys. I just found something funny. I was emailing my friend about the workshops today, and the DNS have this one was interesting. The topic of the workshop is DNS. It's an observation. Hello.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to NetThing 2020. It is day 2 for us, and we are now at our second session on DNS abuse, which will be hosted by GoDaddy Registry. So without further ado, I'd just like to mention a few things in terms of housekeeping. Number one is that all sessions are recorded and also live streamed on YouTube. Number two is that we do have a code of conduct. Please familiarize yourself with it on our website, netthing.org.au, if you haven't seen our code of conduct. The third thing as well is that please be interactive. We have the Zoom chat if you would like to post any comments, and we also have the raise hand function if you would like to ask any questions audibly. Let's see if I remember everything. I think that's it. After this session, though, I just want to promote that we will have a social trivia during lunch break, which is also organized by GoDaddy Registry. So don't leave straight away after the DNS abuse session to join us for some fun and trivia. So that's it from me, really. I'd just like to introduce our facilitator for this session, Donna Austin. Over to you, Donna.
Thanks very much, Melody, and thanks to everybody for attending this session today. My name is Donna Austin. I'm the head of registry policy at GoDaddy Registry. I'm also the chair of the Registry Stakeholder Group, an organisation that is a subset of ICANN's stakeholder groups and community. So the title of the session today is DNS Abuse, Why Awareness and Understanding is Important. And before we get into it, I'd just like to introduce my panelists. And I'm very thankful to all of you for agreeing to be involved with this discussion today. So Catherine Smith. Catherine, if you just raise your hand and wave to everybody. Catherine is Principal Consultant at Catherine Smith Consultancy. She's a consultant in the area of cybercrime, cybersecurity, communications and security regulation and policy with over 30 years experience. Catherine, since 2017, has been an expert on the Council of Europe, and she's currently working with the Kingdom of Tonga to support the strengthening of cybercrime laws and policies in the Pacific. So welcome, Catherine, and thank you for being with us. Chris Wright, there he is, it's hiding under my piece of paper. Chief Executive Officer at Security Shift Group. Prior to his current role as CEO of Security Shift, Chris has been a well-known face within the domain name industry for many years through his previous roles as the CTO at Bombora Technologies and then as the CSO at Newstar as part of the registry business. He's also previously been a regular participant at ICANN and IOTF global internet bodies. So thanks to you, Chris, as well for joining. Keith Besgrove. Keith is Vice Chair of Internet Australia, has a background in communications policy and innovation issues. During his government career, he was responsible for regional broadband radio spectrum licensing and sales and global internet policies. Earlier in his career, he developed OECD's Working Party on Information Security and Privacy. These days, he divides his time between several non-profit groups. As I said, he's Vice Chair of Internet Australia, Joint Chair of Regional Arts Company, the CAD Factory, and a governing member of OUDA, and a board member of the Australian Communications Consumer Action Network, which is ACAN, not to be confused with ICANN. And Bruce Tonkin, who is the Chief Operating Officer at .au Domain Administration. Bruce has a long history working within the domain name industry, having held senior positions at Melbourne IT, as well as Vice Chairman of the Board of Directors at ICANN. Bruce joined OUDA in 2017 as the project lead in the Registry Transformation Project, before being made the Chief Operating Officer in July 2018. So thank you very much to all of our panelists. So I just want to give a little bit of a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today and some of the context. So as I said, I'm involved in ICANN, and I know there's a number of folks that are participants on this call that are also involved in ICANN. So they will appreciate that over the last 2 years, there's been a lot of conversations around DNS abuse. A lot of cross conversations about what it means and whose responsibility it is. And, you know, the challenge that I have as the chair of the Registry Stakeholder Group is many of the conversations come back to, you know, well, the registries and registrars really should take this on, and they should do more to address DNS abuse. But what we'd like to get into today, and I think this is relevant to everybody at the moment. So as people across the world become more dependent upon the internet to carry out their day-to-day activities because of COVID-19, it's really important for end users and policymakers alike to, you know, be familiar with and understand more about DNS abuse. So, and Chris will provide an overview in a little while about, you know, what DNS abuse is from a technical perspective. But it's activities such as phishing that's undertaken by cyber criminals intended to, you know, trick somebody into revealing sensitive personal or financial information. So I'm sure that, you know, everyone's familiar with, probably more familiar with the language of cybercrime. or fraud on the internet or abuse on the internet. But what we want to kind of draw out today is that, you know, we have DNS abuse and then we have other forms of abuse. And then let's talk about, you know, where the responsibility is in the spectrum across the community. So regardless of the term you use, I think it's becoming more important that internet users, businesses and governments really understand that while the internet has served to enrich our lives and enable many of us continue to work from home, conduct homeschooling, and continue business operations locally and globally, it also provides opportunity for bad actors to exploit the vulnerabilities of the internet. So, you know, I was looking through the annual cyber threat report that was published recently by the Australian Cyber Security Centre, and it noted that cybercrime is one of the most pervasive threats that's facing Australia. Australians have lost over 634 million to scams in 2019, and the industry estimates have previously placed cybersecurity incidents as high as 29 billion annually, although it's very difficult to measure that and get accurate figures on that. So, you know, whether you call it DNS abuse, whether you call it cybercrime, whether you talk about it as, you know, abuse on the internet, frauds or scams, I think there is an element here that is it's a conversation we need to have across a lot of different sectors. And also I think there's an importance of raising awareness for the end user. So what I'm hoping that we can get into today is let's understand what DNS abuse is from a technical perspective, and then draw a little bit out about you know, how we address that, what mechanisms are available to registries and registrars in particular, but then take that a little bit broader. So Holly, I noticed in the chat you said, you know, at what point do you want to ask questions? Preference really is to have questions at the end of the session, but if we're in the middle of a conversation and you have something that's really pertinent to it, then raise your hand and I'll switch over to you. So with that, we'll get started. And Chris, if I can just turn to you first, and if you can just provide us with an explanation of what DNS abuse means from a technical registrar perspective. Thanks.
Thanks, Donna. So yes, as Donna alluded to, DNS abuse is used by a number of different parties, and sometimes to mean slightly different or even very, very different things. But as most of you will be aware, DNS fundamentally underpins everything you do on the internet, whether that be sending an email, going to a website, doing your internet banking online, or anything. Without DNS, the internet just simply wouldn't be usable by humans or function correctly. So because of that, DNS is fundamentally at the core of any abuse or any malicious activity that occurs on the internet. Whether that be a botnet, phishing, farming, command and control, any of these malicious activities that occur on the internet, generally a domain name can be, or a domain name is involved in perpetrating that activity. So because of that, domain names are in certain circles seen as the core element with perpetrating those threats, and also seen as a nice, easy way to be able to help address those threats. Because if you eliminate the domain name or you take action with respect to the domain name, you can stop that threat occurring or stop that threat being further perpetrated. So with that definition in mind, things that we tend to see being malicious things happening online that use domain names tend to be things like phishing. So trying to trick people to provide credentials or so forth by pretending to be a website. And generally that's done by registering confusing similar names, names where we, in IDN space, where we use characters that are confusingly similar or misspellings of names and so forth. So phishing is generally achieved by trying to deceive someone into going to the incorrect website. Other ways that phishing might be achieved is where links in emails or websites are dressed up to look like they're the correct link, but actually behind the scenes, they're going to somewhere completely different. All in all, it still has a domain name at the end of the day that's being used to capture that information, or to render the website to capture the information from the users. Malware, generally, if you are being exposed to malware online, you're probably going to a website and being tricked into downloading it, or your computer's automatically talking to some other service that is available via a domain name to download that malware. And then botnets, they generally tend to use DNS in what they call the command and control infrastructure. So botnets are useless if they can't be actioned or pointed at a target and told to do something. And once you have a botnet out there with a large number of computers involved in that botnet, the activities that botnet takes need to be coordinated. The smart attackers, what they've done is they've started to use DNS as a way to facilitate control over that botnet and facilitate telling that botnet what to do, giving it commands and actions. And the reason that's done is because if a botnet was to report back to an IP address or something, it's relatively easy for someone to locate that IP address and shut it down and therefore render the botnet unusable. But by using DNS and using something called a DJ, a domain generation algorithm, the botnet itself is able to actually continually change the domain name that it is referring to get its command and control instructions. And that makes it a really tricky thing for DNS to be able to predict and control. Spam is another thing that DNS facilitates. As we know, DNS facilitates email. Spam is just unsolicited email. So DNS is involved in sending of spam. Spam, when we talk about abuse, might be categorized into a few different subcategories. Marketing spam and malicious spam. From the perspective of abuse, we're generally concerned with malicious spam. Other types of DNS abuse that we might see that might not necessarily fall into the malicious category, abuse around commercial abuse, so trademark infringement, impersonation of other sites, potentially providing reputational damage to organizations, and so forth. And then the last part where DNS abuse sometimes is used to capture is content. So as you know, you access a website using DNS, and that website may have malicious or inappropriate content hosted on it, whether it's child pornography, violent content, or information about controlled substances. The DNS is still the signpost pointing people to that website to be able to access and view that information. So a lot of times when people talk about DNS abuse, content is lumped in under that bucket as well. So there are a number of different things that might be referred to as DNS abuse. There are, of course, a lot more, but I think part of the conversation today is to talk about what these different things are and where action can be taken, depending on the type of abuse that's occurring.
Thanks very much, Chris. That was a really helpful overview and gets us off on the right foot. So, Catherine, given your participation in international fora, is DNS abuse a commonly used term? And if it is the meaning consistent with what Chris has described? And if not commonly used, then what is the more reference terminology?
Yeah, thanks, Donna. Look, I think everything that Chris has talked about, what is DNS abuse, is historically called cybercrime. And the fora that I get to be in, it depends who you're talking to as to what they call it. I think it's sort of the high end of town, large organisations like the Council of Europe and the European Commission are beginning to talk more about DNS abuse because they're trying to find a global solution to the kind of abuse we're seeing. However, when you look at, as a lawyer, to legislate in this area, you're more likely to be talking about cybercrime. And depending on what country you're talking to, you're really just talking to them about internet crime, really what's affecting their society and the kind of abuse that they're seeing. I think the reality is that cybercrime has been around, in a big way since about 2000, since the Budapest Convention came into place. And I think now things are more evolving and people are getting understanding, not only are there smart attackers, they're actually smart people who are looking at these types of crime, and they're really wanting to define it more as to the technology that it's necessarily hitting rather than the victim that it's hitting. So DNS, in my view, from talking to people about it in sort of the international forum, is more about identifying where the crime may be happening, whereas when you're looking to legislate, you're more looking about detection, investigation, attribution, and prosecution. So you're more then talking about cybercrime, because you know, even though abuse is a commonly used term, it's very rarely used term in legislation. So you always talk about, you know, criminality and things like that about things. But completely agree that we're all on the same page, but the names are evolving, I think. And I think given everything that's been happening in COVID and the breadth of the offences, there is more talk about DNS abuse.
The dreaded unmute button. So Bruce and Keith, are there any other forms of internet activity that's also considered, you know, abuse, but maybe not technically DNS abuse as described by Chris?
I'll just comment, I think, Donna, that what other people might say is they're really talking about website activities that have criminal activity associated with them. So they're not necessarily related to the domain name. The distinction between domain names and websites and things is probably clear to the average consumer. So I think they just sort of see that all as the one thing. And if they see something that they think is criminal happening on a website, maybe it's a website selling drugs that are illegal, then they sort of think, well, someone should do something about it. And I think, as Chris pointed out, it's often hard to find out who's responsible for a particular website. And the one thing that's relatively easy to find out is you can find out the identity of the registrar from the WHOIS information.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. And I think government generally would tend to just lump those two. Sorry, for some reason I turned off my video, apologies. I think there's a consolidation within the minds of regulators when they're looking at these issues.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Keith. So I just wonder, you know, one of the challenges we have at ICANN is a common definition of abuse. So is it important on a global scale or a national scale that we have or would there be any benefit from having a definition of what we mean by, you know, DNS abuse or cybercrime, or what the categories fall under, or do we have enough of an understanding of what we think it is that it's not really, doesn't really matter?
Donna, I think that that's the core crux of the issue at the moment, is that there is not shared understanding of what is DNS abuse and what isn't DNS abuse. I think it's unfortunate that we are standardizing on this term DNS abuse because it kind of miscategorizes a lot of the things that are being lumped under the name DNS abuse at the moment. There's some comments going on in the chat at the moment about the darknet and Tor. And those people are exactly right. Those technologies actually don't even make use of the DNS, at least in the way that we traditionally understand the DNS is used, and at least in the way that the DNS is used broadly on the internet at the moment. So if we maintain this sort of narrow focus on online abuse under a DNS abuse banner, thinking about just traditional DNS, we are by definition taking all of these dark websites out of the definition. And that's unfortunate, of course, because that's where a lot of the illegal activity or malicious activity occurs. So yeah, I do think we still have a definition problem, and I do think more work needs to occur in that space before we can actually start to address these things. And I think subcategorization is going to be important, because the action that you take to address each of these things is going to be different depending on the subcategory of what actually is happening. Not to mention jurisdictional issues, and that's something that might be illegal in one area is not illegal in another jurisdiction, and so forth. And of course, the internet being global, that just complicates things further. But yeah, definition, I think, is definitely a first step.
So Holly, I see you have your hand up, and I'll come back to you in a minute, but I just want to ask, you know, where do you start that conversation? So Catherine, would you start that at a national level and then take it to an international level and try to get assistance around that? Or, you know, how would that actually happen? Because to me, it sounds, given the global nature of the internet, it seems a really difficult problem to solve.
Look, I actually think it has to be at the international level. I think that domestically, you know, we're all happy to put in our legal frameworks, and I worked on Australia's cybercrime legislation and put it in place and that sort of thing. And there, when you talk about definitions, you know, really cybercrime, when you go to legislation in national laws, it's really refined down to, you know, using a service to, to illegally intercept someone or to compromise a computer. They're really technologically neutral terminology that you use when you come down to actually legislate in the end for it. However, if you want to talk about what we all accept in our global society as being unacceptable behaviour that we will all take away and legislate in our own national or sovereign ways, then you have to look at it at the international level. And there are fora available for that. I think one of the significant things in this and about DNS abuse is it's all of a sudden brought a whole new group of players, in my view, into the chat. You know, previously, you know, you would have, you know, service providers who are actually providing the service to the person down the road who had a botnet take over their computer, or you looked at the, you know, sort of the national level of potentially cyber security frameworks that you need to protect Australia's, framework. However, the reality is that there needs to be sort of an acceptable set of norms that we all agree to, and that we all agree to go away and legislate, and if we can, but you can't legislate for most of this. You can always legislate for crime, but because the reality is the criminals are moving in a really fast pace, they're very creative, they're very smart, they're finding new ways to abuse the internet or the DNS every single day. So it's about having those conversations and looking at all the potential solutions, which is a lot about education. It's a lot about having, as I say, acceptable norms, and it's about having all of the relevant people in the tent, not having ICANN sit and talk about something else, having law enforcement talk about something else, have the UN talk about something else, you know. So it's all about bringing people together under the same sort of framework to talk about this stuff, I think is a very important starting point.
Donna,
Thanks,
I'm aware that ICANN itself has been doing a lot of work in this space. What I'm not aware of is the extent to which they're actually sharing that with other international bodies. So I guess I'd be interested perhaps from Catherine as to what sort of crossover of analysis might be going on in this space at the moment, because it does seem to me that ICANN has invested quite a bit of time already in looking at these issues and may not have got very far with some of the definitional things that Chris was talking about earlier. It made Holly laugh.
Okay, so from my experience is there is not a lot of crossover. The sort of international fora that I've been involved in, being the Council of Europe and the UN, and also working working in the Pacific with countries who and working with their certs and cybersecurity and things like that, is the visibility level is very low. I'm certainly aware that there is another expert from Council of Europe who has a role in ICANN, and I think, you know, there's a bit of information sharing, but there's no, in my understanding, necessarily, you know, when I go out as an expert to talk to a country somewhere in the world about this stuff, we're never really looking at, you know, what might be coming out of ICANN at all.
Okay.
We're looking at what's coming out of other international fora.
Thanks, Keith. Holly, did you have a question for the panel?
Really a comment, and I'm almost saying it, can I use the term DNS misuse? Because some of it is criminal as defined in various criminal legislations. Some of it has unfortunate consequences for consumers, but isn't necessarily criminal in that context. So in one sense, national governments do what they can to define something in a criminal code, as the Australian government has done. But then some of the definitions that Chris has, the terms that Chris has used, that's not necessarily criminal. And it can only be dealt with as something that is, let's say, antisocial, that is misuse of the DNS. And ICANN can deal with it in sort of a consumer protection framework and define something that is inappropriate, whatever whatever term you want to use. but is not necessarily criminal, but is nevertheless harmful to consumers, if that makes sense. Thank you.
I think the challenge that you face with that is that definition of inappropriate is different all around the world. And trying to get the constituents of ICANN to get together and agree on what's going to be the common definition of inappropriate is going to be challenging in itself. But then the next ramification of that is let's pretend they do get to a definition of what's inappropriate. What do we want them to do about it? We seem to now be saying that we're going to put all the responsibility into the registry and registrar bucket. And then that becomes challenging for registry and registrars because they effectively become judge and jury. They're entities that are set up not to be able to make these decisions. They're not experts in cybercrime. They're not experts in determining what's appropriate and inappropriate. But we're now asking those registrars and those registries to take on that role and become the judge and jury. And if they receive a complaint or something's identified to them, they now have to make a judgment call as to whether or not it's appropriate for them to take action. And that comes, of course, with a whole set of legal risks to them. So unless the regulatory framework in each country is set up to protect them against those risks, that's going to be a challenge. But then on top of that, reputational risk and so forth. There's a lot of things that you're then now asking those registries and registrars to do. It's not necessarily saying that it can't be done, but I think it's a lot more needs to occur outside the ICANN framework to actually make that something that's plausible and able to happen.
Can I reply to that? I don't think we've come to the stage where we've said it's all registry, registrar. I think the discussions have come to the stage where we are saying, let's address this. How do we address it? In some cases, it's going to be the role of compliance that we would argue with. In some cases, it might be education, but I don't think we've come to a final judgment on that. What we're asking for is a discussion because we want it to stop. So I don't want to blame you. Not yet, anyway.
No, understood. I was just saying, if we restrict the conversation to the ICANN world, that is effectively what it becomes. It becomes a registry registrar discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, Holly, just to provide a different perspective on it from the registry registrar side, when we have these conversations in ICANN, we feel like we're on the defensive all the time because people are saying, you must do more because there's no other option available to people. So that within the ICANN context, that seems to be the case. And the other challenge we have is that, morphing of what is DNS abuse. So within the ICANN community, we can't come to any agreement on what that is. And yet we talk about it ad nauseum, but we don't really come up with any plausible path forward. So I think the latest is maybe the GNSO Council has to do something. But even we're supposed to be the organisation that has the expertise in this area, but we still can't agree on what DNS abuse is and what's the best method to deal with it. So maybe just moving forward, Bruce. So we've talked, about the definition of DNS abuse. So from a registry registrar perspective, can you kind of give us an outline of what options are available to registries and registrars to deal with DNS abuse?
Sure. Maybe I'll just start with the ComAU environment first, because I know a lot of people in Australia are probably familiar with ComAU. Firstly, with ComAU, it's unusual for a domain name directly at ComAU to be leveraged for DNS abuse. We actually have very low levels of abuse with respect to the domain name. So by that, I mean, misspelling of a major brand, for example. And it's mostly because we have upfront validation of the registrants at the time of registration. And if a name is being abused, it can be drawn to either the registrar's attention or to OUTR's attention, and the domain name can be cancelled on the basis that the person that has registered the name is not eligible for the name. More commonly, what we see in abuse in Australia is actually hacked websites. And this is very typical for small businesses. They've probably had a web developer build their website some years ago. They do not patch that website, so they don't keep the website up to date with the latest security fixes. And so the website itself gets hacked. And so what that means is you might have a quite innocent domain name. It might be, Bruce's cake shop or something, .com.au, and the front page of that site is doing what you'd expect it to be doing, selling cakes. But there's a subdirectory in there that's actually a phishing site for the Westpac Bank. And the person that owns that website has no idea that that exists. And that is not something that the registry or the registrar is going to take the site down for, because the registrant in that case is basically innocent. They're as much a victim of the crime as the end users that are being tricked into going to those website pages. In those cases in Australia, we actually have a fairly reliable Whois service. And from that Whois service, you could find the contact email address for the person that registered that domain name, and also the contact email address for their technical contact. And most businesses, if they're notified that someone's hiding illegal content on their website, will want to take action and get some help to do that. You could also report it to the registrar, and the registrar, if it was hosting the website, may be able to take action as well. But not all websites are hosted by registrars. And in fact, for a typical registrar, probably less than 20% of the domain names that they manage are they offering hosting services. They're often offered by other companies. And so you'd have to identify who the hosting company is to get them to take the site content down based on their policies with respect to abuse. Finally, you could contact, in Australia, you could contact consumer affairs agencies or the police, and they, at least if you get to the right person, will know how to contact the registrar or outer, and we can provide them information on the party that has registered the domain name in accordance with requirements under the Privacy Act, and usually they can take action. It becomes a lot harder when you're dealing with names outside of .au. So the other most common namespace in Australia would be .com. The challenge is there is no eligibility criteria, so anybody can have any .com name they like. So there's no basis for a registry or registrar to take down the domain name on the basis of eligibility. And the other challenge is, even if a website is hacked in .com, the Whois services available now in .com and other generic top-level names mean that they've redacted most of the information that you would have used to contact the registrant. And so the only party that you'll be able to find is the registrar. And then the registrar can either take action if they see that the domain name is directly being used for phishing or malware, or they may be able to direct you to the relevant hosting company if they know who that is, that you could request that hosting company to take it down. Finally, you could contact law enforcement, but again, they would struggle to get information because often the registrars are located outside of Australia, and there is no real laws, if you like, that would require a registrar in another country to provide information to the law enforcement agency in Australia. So much more problematic. And as Catherine pointed out, you do need to look at this at a global level.
Bruce, if I could, just to throw some controversy into the conversation, why not? The piece you said at the start about where the website owner is just as much a victim of the crime as potentially the person that's being phished. Where is the onus on a website owner, though, to adequately protect their website and adequately do appropriate things? If I have a car, I have an obligation to maintain the roadworthiness of that car and ensure that I don't become a threat to other people by having an unroadworthy car that I drive out there on the road. So why should we not have website owners be responsible for ensuring that they're properly secured? Of course, things will still occur, just like if I maintain a roadworthy car, I can still be in an accident. But why should website owners not be responsible for ensuring that they do maintain a secure website that's not able to be hacked and not able to be used in these ways? Not necessarily saying I agree with this, but I'm just throwing the question out there.
Yeah, I think one of the things at least the government's been trying to do, and it's in their recent cybersecurity policy, is they say that businesses, well, the government expects businesses to take precautions to protect the security of their services. But unless they're really big companies and would be picked up under critical infrastructure legislation, or they're a telecommunications carrier, there isn't requirements particularly around small businesses. And I believe what the government's fundamentally trying to do is education. And so the Australian Signals Directorate, for example, has a thing called the Essential 8. And there are 8 sort of very basic things that most people that are operating an online business should consider, such as multi-factor authentication, such as patching their website. I just think that there's a huge gap between the information that's available, let's say on the ASD website, and what the typical small business owner would even contemplate knowing about. I think the education gap is too huge at the moment. They wouldn't even know that those were issues.
Well, I think
I agree with that, but just to jump in quickly in response to Chris, it's the analogy isn't quite right, Chris. It's more like somebody putting acid in your windscreen washer bottle without your knowledge, so that when you spray it, you injure bystanders. You know, you can't put the onus on the driver to know that.
Really?
Yeah, I think there's a fundamental difference between having a law or regulation, and the analogy I use is cars, all right? We have laws and regulations that requires cars to have updated brakes and to now have ABS systems, and that gets updated from time to time from vehicle standards. But we don't put the onus on car manufacturers to make sure that their cars can never be crashed, no matter what the operator does. Ultimately, the operator has some responsibility for preventing a certain behavior. The platform has some responsibility for saving the operator from themselves, but there becomes a limit to what you can expect the platform to do to save the operator from doing dumb things through ignorance or through design or because that's how they thought it was supposed to work.
Yeah, the law generally uses the example of the reasonable person in that situation. So you don't become a guarantor or an insurer. You're judged according to what a reasonable person in that context would have done or would have known or should have known. So that moderating, that qualification does make a big difference in this kind of discussion, because there's a lot of ignorance which isn't necessarily negligent ignorance. It's simply that a lot of people don't understand this context and this space. So that allows scope for maldoers to exploit that ignorance.
So following that, sorry, Chris. I was just going to say something, and Keith will correct me if I'm wrong. And this comes back to sort of the obligation on DNS providers, is that under the Telecommunications Act, like your service providers like Telstra, all the way through to very small ISPs, have to do everything in their power to prevent their services being used for criminal activities. So they actually already have an obligation on them. They've had that obligation for a very long time. And so when you talk about what the role is for DNS providers, is there a similar sort of need for that kind of obligation, which gives you protections as well? Because if you're acting, on behalf of government in effect, or doing everything in good faith, then you're unlikely to be sued, I suppose, by someone. I'm not giving any legal advice here, but it's just that idea of having that obligation in legislation somewhere, or as part of a national requirement, that actually gives you the protection you maybe need, or the impetus you need to actually undertake this work, rather than just say, well, let's give it a go, not really sure what we should be doing in this space.
But the issue, Catherine, is that in many cases, the DNS function that people are using isn't provided by their provider, isn't provided by a carrier, isn't provided by any organisation that's subject to the Australian Telecommunications Act.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that.
Those days are gone.
My point was more about you're having similar obligations on different parts of the whole industry that exists in Australia.
I think it's certainly the case that those obligations only apply to some players and not to others, and they're more rigorous for the carriers than they are for the carriage service providers and ISPs and so on. So I think there's actually quite a good case for trying to make a consistent set of rules around those obligations than exists today. It's somewhat fragmentary. To go back to Chris's original provocative incursion, I think there is certainly a case for some more explicit set of standards. And if I go back to the session I was chairing here yesterday, Malcolm Crompton was making what I thought was quite a good case for more explicit standards which are set to try and guarantee service provision, which are then more deliberately enforced. One of the issues here is that many small business websites are set up by third parties and then not maintained by the website owners, in part because they don't regard it as a high priority until something goes wrong. And at the moment, there's no real obligation on them to do very much other than leave it until something goes wrong. So there is actually a case for more specific obligations in this space generally, I believe.
So Keith, are you suggesting that in the same way that cars that are more than 3-year-old need to go through an annual serviceability check, an annual registration check to make sure the tyres aren't bald and that all the light globes work and all that sort of stuff, that every website owner should be required to annually get some sort of security check done on their website, or they fail accreditation of some way?
Well, I hadn't thought it through in any detail, but as you're speaking, that's starting to sound at least potentially plausible. It is certainly the case that there are tens of thousands of websites in this country operated by small business which don't appear to be regularly maintained, and that are in fact clearly a botnet delight.
And I think from a harm perspective as well, you know, if you looked at the harm caused from, you know, the compromise of a website that could be, you know, multi-millions of dollars or affected many people, then I think, you know, who at the end of the day is responsible for that. So I take the point. I think it was a nice icebreaker there, Chris. I think it's led to some good discussion. Clock, I see your hand is up. Did you have a question for the panel?
Yeah, Chris's example is actually really good because the whole car example comes with, and everyone's had some input here, it comes with assumed knowledge. Hey, I know I need to service my car. Hey, I need to change my tires. Hey, I need to check my wash fluid. When it comes to things of an IT nature, it's much more complicated and intimidating for victims and also for people who own websites, right? I mean, you just go to Wix. I mean, it's all there for you. Register the domain name, upload a few pictures, and you're done. So so to me, I mean, it's all great with legislation or with all the sort of really heavy stuff at that level, which needs to be done. But there's a user education component that's missing, right? The arming of victims to understand what to look for. I mean, I've tried to educate my parents on how to look at emails that they receive because they sign up to a bunch of stuff. Say, hey, listen, just don't click on these things. Recognize the domain name and things like that. And it's a complicated journey, not just through language, because, you know, ethnically I'm Vietnamese. I'm not very good with the language to describe to my parents. So there's that language barrier. But then the barrier of the IT language is also prevalent because things move so quickly. Something that people are familiar with these days, though, for example, and this has taken a long time, and it's to the point where it's nearly outdated, is SSL certificates. They know now, and they're trained through browsers, that if you see a little padlock on the top left-hand corner, it's probably secure, right? But that's it. There's no further, and I'm generalizing, of course, but there's no further step beyond that. Yes, there's a padlock, it's a COM-AU, or it's a whatever. I trust it, and then you continue on. And I think that's where the biggest gap is. We're talking about all these things that help prevent and manage the problem, but it's also the people who get impacted by it. And using the car example, know when to do a health check on your systems.
Yeah, thanks, Quoc. I think that they're really good points, and I think that's part of the, you know, what frustrates me a little bit about the ICANN conversation is we don't look at that education piece or You know, who else could be helpful in the conversation about DNS abuse and mitigation? You know, Holly and Cheryl, I know you're here, and from ALAC, they're looking at doing some education in this space, but it's a, you know, it's a big ask, really. And I don't know how far down the track they've got, but, and I did notice, I did some research about what's going on in Australia, and it seems that the Australian Signals Directorate has started to, well, maybe they've been doing it for quite some time, focusing more on the education piece and helping people understand, you know, what are the options available to them to keep themselves safe in an online environment. Chris, you know, just moving on, you know, we've talked Bruce talked a little bit about registries and registrars and what they can do to mitigate abuse, but is there anything else, you know, that other tools or technology that's available to people to protect themselves or businesses?
Yeah, sure. So because by nature, as I said at the start, pretty much everything on the internet in the end needs a domain name to work. It's fortunate that people that are concerned about these threats don't have to wait for ICANN and the EU and governments and everybody else to sort this out. They can actually protect themselves against these things at the moment. And there's a number of different technologies that you can use at the moment that you can deploy on inside your corporate network or your small business network, or even use at home, that can help to protect you against these things. And they effectively amount to a DNS filter at the end of the day. So there are a lot of companies out there that make it their business to go and identify problematic domain names, whether they be domain names that are hosting malicious content or domain names that are used for phishing or command and control for botnets. And those organizations publish that information, sometimes for a fee, sometimes for free. There's also organizations out there that make a living out of categorizing domain names into, you know, what content they might have and whether that potentially be about controlled substances or violent content or so forth. So that they're just categorizing. They're saying this domain name hosts content of this type, such that they're not getting yet involved in whether that content is appropriate or not. They're just categorizing the domain names. And then most modern firewalls, and whether that be a next generation firewall that you might deploy in a business, or potentially even some of the consumer devices that you can buy for home, they then have the ability to set up filters on domain names such that within your network, you can't access domain names that are deemed either inappropriate, or you can control domain names based on content. So don't allow access to domain names that host violent content within my network, or please block domain names that are being known to be used for phishing and so forth. So most modern firewalls these days have that capability, and that, as long as you obviously know that it's there and turn it on and use it, you would need to deploy that. I noticed the comment in the chat about DOH and DOT, which is yes, one of the big reasons why there's a lot of resistance from corporates and large organizations for the deployment of DOH and DOT is that it actually makes this filtering almost impossible to do. But the other thing as well, that if you don't have one of these firewalls or don't want to replace this equipment, there are software products that you can install locally on your machine that can do the same thing and do the filtering at that point as well. So there is a way that an end user can protect themselves against these threats whilst waiting for all of this to be sorted out. Of course, just with the conversation that we just had, it's an education thing again. Most consumers probably don't even know that these things exist. And even if they did, the amount of people that I know, for example, that have these devices that are capable of doing these things, they just aren't configured. They're not turned on. They don't have this functionality enabled and so forth. It's ironic because they paid all that money for that device for these protections, but they're not even being protected. But there is things out there that can help, and it is worth looking into it if you are concerned, which you should be.
Thanks, Chris. So, Keith, from your experience at a national government level, what tools or approaches or stakeholder engagement options are available to government to deal with something that has this, breadth and touch on different stakeholders?
Well, generally speaking, when confronted with a set of issues like this, government's first preference is to try and rely on education as much as it can, And there's certainly been quite a bit of effort gone into that over the last, 2 decades or so. I think Catherine's right. These issues basically have been around in the public sector domain since about 2000. One of the dilemmas for government is that while it can put energy into providing information and education, and for example, the ACCC through its ScamWatch system has been providing advice and warnings around online scams for a very long time. The ACMA has been doing similar things. In more recent years, the Cybersecurity Centre has put quite a bit of effort into education as well. The big dilemma with all of that is that certainly for the vast bulk of the population and for the vast majority of small businesses, no one's actually listening to any of this education, because the whole issue is too low level for people to be paying any real attention. So until you get to a level of critical concern, education campaigns can only have a limited impact. So it then goes back to what is the level of concern or anxiety about the potential danger of these things to the economy or to society. Governments respond, but only up to a point with education. If you look at what Cybersecurity Centre and other efforts have done over the years, a lot of the focus has been on large government agencies, large information networks, ensuring that large corporates are taking specific action. There's been a lot less focus on small business, in part because it's hard. It's hard to reach them. It's hard to, education campaigns for small business are wildly difficult to actually succeed with. My personal view is that it's actually probably more realistic to look at setting up some standards that are enforceable, because people respond to legal obligations in a manner which they don't necessarily respond to education campaigns. But that's my personal view. That's not a view that the government is likely to move to anytime soon. So a lot of this is around specific education, specifically responding where specific dangerous situations emerge that are particular to a specific company or a particular organization. But it's somewhat fragmentary and it's somewhat low key. I mean, Catherine, I think would I think agree with me that actually getting education messages across in this space is wildly difficult, because until someone's actually impacted, they're not very interested.
Right. So, Keith, if I can just ask on, building on the idea of a standard, how long would it take a government to develop a standard that would be of value or use in the space?
It would depend who's developing it, but these things can take, they usually take some, at months at least, but usually years. Yeah. I mean, if you actually wanted a specific legislative substantiation for some of these things, it may require changes in base legislation as well. So it's not something that can be done quickly.
Yeah, the other challenge too is that a lot of these websites that we're talking about aren't even hosted in Australia.
Yeah.
So you've got the problem of jurisdiction as well.
Yeah, well, that's a long time ago. I was involved in the anti-spam legislation, and you needed Australian domestic legislation was a necessary but not sufficient condition. You needed to then pursue international collaboration if you were going to have any impact at all.
But Keith, going back to what you were saying about the Australian Cybersecurity Centre and those agencies concentrating on big business and governments and the bigger guys in town more than the end users, obviously there's a limit to how effective that education can be by the number of data breaches we hear about on a weekly basis, where those very same large organisations that are supposed to be educated in these things and have the staff and the resources to do this more properly than your average coffee shop owner can, leaking hundreds of thousands and millions of customer details through cyber breaches or just through administrative stuff-ups every single week. So how effective is education in practice?
I personally don't think it's very effective at all, but it's understandable that government will resort to education there's an expectation that government will be doing, quote, something, unquote, and unless you're prepared to address more fundamental issues around regulation and providing legal obligations to do things, education is the natural thing that governments will fall back on, regardless of whether it's going to work or not.
Well, the other situation that strikes to mind for the education is things like online dating scams. Every 3 to 6 months or so, we get an article on the news, on the TV, about how many people have lost how many millions of dollars sending checks off to somebody they thought was interested in a marriage proposal in Nigeria. That is absolutely a education issue, and that is one of the examples where we do see sometimes more effective, or at least more widespread campaigns to get a message out to be aware of these things. But again, people are still falling for it month after month after month.
Paul, the difficulty with that one, heard strictly from Alistair McGibbon, right? Okay. An example, the police went up to a woman who had fallen for one of these things, and she was going to support this beautiful young man, right? Gave thousands of dollars. She got a warning and an explanation from the cop. He was back there 2 weeks later with the same warning after she had lost thousands more. So education is not always effective.
So I think what we need to acknowledge, and I think this is something that's come out in COVID-19, is that there is a criminal element that will use people's vulnerability to their advantage. And that is something that will be it's going to be difficult to overcome. We, at ICAM, we had a session, the registries and registrars did a session on, whether there was an uptake in abuse as a result of COVID-19. And we weren't necessarily seeing that. What we did see is that there was an uptake in the registration of domain names because people were, people were looking to do good things on the internet and put up a website and do some good stuff around COVID-19. But I guess that brings us back to a conversation we had earlier that probably people who have never put up a website before have actually gone in and, bought a domain name, put up a website, thought they were doing good stuff. But maybe there's another criminal element there that's taking advantage of that lack of knowledge. So, that's a friction that we have in that the criminals really understand what they're doing, and they're really clued into how this system works and what they need to do to their advantage. I mean, the dating is something that's people talk about and refer back to. I actually read an article when I was home last in Australia about a couple who had seen an ad for a tractor that was $20,000, and they thought this sounds like a really good deal. They were in Western Australia. The site was the place that was selling it was in Darwin. They did their due diligence on the site. They made contact with people. They checked out the location. They sent the $20,000. They never got the tractor, right? So they were kind of clued in and did their due diligence. So this is a really difficult nut to crack, I suppose, because it's multifaceted. So we're coming up to, I was going to say 7 p.m., but it's midday for people there in Melbourne. So we've got 10 minutes left if people want to ask some questions. But I'd just like to offer the panel an opportunity for closing remarks.
Sure, I'll jump in first.
Thanks, Catherine.
I'd like to go back to a conversation that I had probably, and it's certainly aging me, about 20 years ago, and Keith will remember our good friend Mike Rothery, who's no longer with us, and we would sit there and argue about whether it's cybersecurity, cybercrime, who were the victims, who was it a financial, loss where the banks would wear, the 20,000 that was lost through a scam, or whether it was, just Joe Blogs down the street, or whether it was government agencies and that sort of thing. And what we would sit there and come to the decision of is that the only way to ever resolve this was to have the conversations. but not just have conversations between ourselves who are in government departments and with our colleagues in other government departments. It was about ensuring that all the relevant players had a seat at the table. That certainly hasn't always been the case, because you tend to pick the person who you know from a particular agency or organisation who is an expert in that field, who you think is bringing all the information to the table to help you develop that policy. But what I would say, having worked with the Budapest Convention, which is the Council of Europe Convention on Cybercrime, for a lot of years now, is that approaches like it has, which is all about harmonisation of approaches. It's all about consistency across global borders. It acknowledges that we all have very different national approaches, but it is a technologically neutral framework that all countries can pick up and actually legislate in the space of cybercrime, because it's not just about DNS abuse, it's about child abuse, it's about, you know, those things that they stick on ATMs because they're doing that in the Pacific, you know, and it's still online crime, but someone sticks it on the internet, they don't go to a DNS provider to do it. So it's about having the conversations, getting the people to the table, and if ICANN is doing a lot of this stuff and they have a visibility of things, then it should be fed into, you know, policy departments, international fora and things like that. So anyway, they're just my thoughts. Thanks, Donna.
I'd like to echo Catherine's comments. In a former life, I was quite heavily involved in the OECD Working Party on Information Security and Privacy. One of the great powers of the OECD is they tend to draw ideas from everybody. One of the great shortcomings of the OECD is that it has no power to then take its ideas anywhere unless people pick up the quality of those ideas. But I think Catherine has really articulated a very important point. You can't solve this stuff in your own country without solving it with other countries as well. If ICANN is doing exhaustive work in this area, and it does seem like it's been doing that, then it needs to do a better job of spreading that to other global organizations rather than just trying to solve it itself.
Keith, I wouldn't say it's doing exhaustive work. I'd say it's doing exhausting work. With sadly not much progress being made along the way. And part of the challenge is that we're having a conversation amongst ourselves and we're protecting turf. So that's the challenge with the conversation we're having there. Chris, do you have any thoughts as we wrap up?
Yeah, so just we're touching on the small business having a website that potentially isn't protected as well as it should be, and we talked. There was some mention then of even large corporates can't get this right, and they seem to be leaking data as well in various circumstances. And it all sort of stems back to sort of one fundamental truth, which is a fundamental truth is cybersecurity that we run up against all the time. Protecting yourself properly online, especially as a business, costs money. And it's money that doesn't get you more sales. It's money that doesn't bring you more revenue. It's money that doesn't do anything for your business. It's just money straight out the door. And if you've never been hacked, or you've never been a victim of an attack, or you are a risk adverse, sorry, the opposite of a risk adverse person, a person that's open to taking risks, it's money that you just won't spend. And then once something happens and you're breached and your data is exposed or so forth, it's too late at that point. You can't put it all back in the bucket. And unfortunately, I think the only way you can start to change that, all the education in the world is not going to change that sort of thinking, that sort of behavior. Their businesses at the end of the day, they exist for a primary purpose, is to make it hurt. Make it hurt when there's a breach, make it hurt when something happens. And the only way to make it hurt is going to be some sort of regulation, some sort of punishment, some sort of the reasonable test that was talked about before, of course, has to come into play. We have to ensure that you've done everything that somebody of your size or so forth could reasonably be expected to do. But if you haven't, it should hurt.
Thanks, Chris. Bruce?
Thanks, Donna. I quite like some of the analogies people have been providing on the car industry, and I think there were suggestions that there's laws around seatbelts and brakes, but a vast majority of the security features in cars today are not through any kind of legislation. So airbags are not legislated. Indicators if somebody's trying to overtake you are not mandated. So there are a lot of innovations that have happened in the car industry. And I think when you look at that whole thing, it's a mixture of education, it's trust markers as to what sort of service providers, how safe a particular car is, and consumer awareness that you actually ask those questions when you go to buy, because I think you have to have security by design and it needs to be built into the product. But as Chris said, unless there's an incentive to do that, why would you? And if you look at the car industry, if I just pick up any newspaper, it'll actually report whoever got killed last night in a car accident. It's actually, in fact, I get their photos in the paper as to these are the people that got killed. And so you're aware that something bad can happen to you when you're driving a car. Then there's people that'll actually independently do ratings on cars and say this is a 5-star rating or a 4-star rating, etc. And then car companies themselves, in the way they promote the features of their cars, sure, they'll be how fast it takes you to get from 0 to 100, but most even high performance cars will actually advertise safety features as well, such as automatic braking if there's an obstacle in front of you or something. So I think you've got to have a look at the system holistically, and I think it is a bit of education. If the government could if we even had a security rating system, Chris, that said, we've rated all these businesses and this business has got a 5-star rating for security and this one's got a 1-star. And that was actually on websites and you actually made decisions on that basis. I think that would help also.
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks very much to the panelists and everybody that engaged in this conversation. When I started out and thinking about this, I thought education was the answer. I thought awareness raising was the answer, but it's not that simple. We had a bit of a prep call with this with some of the panelists earlier in the week, and Catherine said it takes a village, and I think it really does. And if I can, I don't really like the idea of drawing a COVID analogy, but we can't see COVID-19. And a lot of the time we can't see the harm that's going on in the internet because it's being done discreetly. So we're generally oblivious to what harm we're potentially getting ourselves into. I'd love to find a way to, continue this conversation and see if there is another level that we can take this to. I don't know what fora that is. I don't know how we do that, but there has been some really good discussion today, and I've really appreciated. It's been nice for me to get my head out of that ICANN community and understand that there really is some good stuff that's going on outside of that. And if we could bring, I hate to say it, that level of maturity into the ICANN discussion, it would be tremendous. So we're at 7:09, 12:09. I don't want to get in the way of the GoDaddy Registry quiz. I'll be in trouble if I do, but Catherine, Chris, Keith, Bruce, sincere thanks again for your contribution today. And back to you, Melody.
Thanks, Donna.
Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. And thank you to all our awesome speakers as well. I hope you had enjoyed that session on DNS abuse. We will now actually go to a break. This will be our lunch break for 15 minutes. But before you leave us, we actually have organized a quiz as well during our lunch break. So I wonder if Alex is on the line and our quiz master as well.
Hello, I'm here. Hi, I'm Beck. I'm your quiz master.
Is that Beck?
Sorry, is it Beck?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay. Let's have Beck on the screen, and everyone enjoy your lunch break and the quiz.
All right, everyone. Hello, welcome. My name is Beck Charwood. I am your quiz host for NetThing, sponsored by GoDaddy Registry, one of the world's largest and leading domain name registry providers. So how are we going to play along today? What I need you to do is to get your phone out or start a second tab. And I need you to go to poll GoDaddyEV.com. It's up the top there on the quiz screen / GoDaddy Registry. If you jump up there, that's where you'll be submitting your answers, which you want to get on board with, guys, because there's some big prizes available today. So any T's and C's are available in the chat, but the prizes you are playing for today is first prize is a $500 Amazon gift voucher, which is very exciting. Second prize is a $300 Uber Eats voucher, perfect in time for lunch today, and a $100 Red Balloon gift voucher for third place. So these are real prizes that we're paying for. We've got 22 questions in total. They're all multiple choice with some true and false in there as well. Okay, I hope everyone, I'll give you a hot second to make sure everyone's on board, everyone's ready to play. Each question has a timer on it. So the faster you answer the question, the more points you get. Every answer is worth points though. It's up to 1,000 points per answer. We're going to be checking with the leaderboard as well as we go, so we can see who's climbing and who's falling as we go through. All right, I think everyone, I hope that's enough time to get started. Are we all, can I see some thumbs in the air if we're ready to go? I think I've seen 2 thumbs. Can we get some thumbs up, everyone? Let's see them. Let's see those thumbs, baby. Woo! Oh, nice. Someone sent an emoji thumb. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, let's go with our first question. Here we go on the board. What company did the founders of YouTube work for before starting up YouTube? All right, let's see our options. We've got Spotify, Pinterest, PayPal, and BlackBerry. So what company did the founders of Spotify work for before YouTube? Click in now. You've got 8 seconds left. You can see 8 people have submitted down there in the right-hand corner. Let's get everyone's answers in. All right, time is up. Let's see who got it right. Our answers for that one is PayPal was the correct answer. Very well done to most of you. 60% of people got it right. All right, checking the leaderboard. Elliot, wow, you responded the second those answers came up, a full 1,000 points. PW up on 138, very nice. And Pablo coming in third place there for the first question. All right, let's move on to our next question. What does ICANN stand for? I'm sure you all know this by now. What does ICANN stand for? All right, very quick on the answers there. Everyone seems to have buzzed in. Still waiting on some more results. What does ICANN stand for? 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's see the answer. So Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. 92% right. 8% of people, what are you doing? Get it together. This is the second question. They're only going to get harder from here. All right, let's have a look at that leaderboard again. Elliot, what are you doing, Elliot? Do you have a super mouse or something? You're clicking in so fast. We've got PW in second place and Pablo in third. Maggie climbing a little bit closer in the points there. All right. A mysterious Mr. A in 10th place. Ooh, I've got hope in Mr. A. I think you can take it home. All right, let's move on to our next question. True or false? eBay was originally called ecobay.com. True or false? All right. Was it originally called EchoBay? You got a lot of time on here. I'm glad it's still not called EchoBay. Nowhere as good as eBay. Nowhere near as catchy. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Let's have a look. It was true. And most of you didn't get that right. Oh my God. All right. This could have changed the game. Let's have a look at that leaderboard. Oh, and Rachel has taken the lead. Yes, very well done, Rachel. Awesome stuff. Elliot, you missed out. Didn't even submit an answer for that one. Crazy. All right, let's go to our next question. In November 1996, Jeff Hudson, our keynote speaker formed what organization alongside Hugh Irvine and Bob Kummerfeld? All right, let's look at our options. We've got ARNet, or AARNet, my bad, ISOC AU, NetThing, ASIO, or none of the above. So, Jeff Houston, keynote speaker for us, formed an organization in 1996 along Hugh Irvine and Bob Kummerfeld. Which one of these was it? Time's up. Let's have a look. It was ISOC AU. Oh my goodness. And only a few people getting it right. Let's see who got it right. I think we're going to see a big climb in the leaderboard. And PW comes up, takes the cake, first place. Very well done, PW. Round of applause for PW. Excellent. Okay, let's move on to our next question. What does MSM stand for? So not MSN, popular about 10 years ago. RIP, I miss MSN. What does MSM stand for? Mail System Messaging Services Model, Many Stakeholders Materialize, or Multi-Stakeholder Model? Which one of these? All right, time is up. Let's have a look at our answers. Oh, multi-stakeholder model. And most of you got that right. Very well done, everyone. Nice. Okay. Shall we see who is in the lead now? Oh, PW still up top. Elliot's still close to that leaderboard. I can see. I want Elliot to win it back now, to be honest. He's been down for 2 questions. I'm worried. Okay, next question. Let's do it. Facebook was launched in which year? All right, this is going to be a quick one. You can get on your buzzers fast for this. Here we go with our options. We've got 2000, 2002, 2003, or 2004. All right, what year was Facebook launched? 2000, 2002, 2003, or 2004? 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see the answer. Oh, 2004, nearly 16 years ago. I miss it. I miss it. All right. 40% of you got that one right. And Elliot back at the top. I knew you could do it. Is everyone doing very well? Some high scores here. Okay, Maggie, what's happening? Let's get back. I want to see some climbing on the leaderboard there. We can make this happen. All right, next question. What does DNS stand for? Dental numbing serum, domain name system, do not stuff up, data networking system, or none of the above. I mean, do not stuff up is what applies to my life mostly. I do a lot of that. 3, 2, 1. Let's see the correct answer. We've got domain name system, and all of you got that right. Very well done. Let's have a look at that leaderboard. Let's see who answered the fastest, though. Elliot, again, very well done. PW is chasing you by just a couple of 100 points. Pablo's down there. What happened to Rachel? She's down there too. All right, come on, Rachel. Get back up the top there. Maggie, again, where are you? I miss you. You're probably busy eating a sandwich. That's okay. Understandable. You got to get the fuel, then you'll come back in. All right, next question. Let's move along. The robustness principle, be liberal in what you accept and conservative with what you send, is attributed to, oh, let's see who said this. Steve Jobs, Vince Cerf, John Postal, or Tim Berners-Lee. So who said be liberal in what you accept and conservative with what you send? All right, let's see our answers. It was John Postal, and most of you got that right. Very well done, everyone. Yes. Okay, let's see that leaderboard again. Elliot on a perfect 6,000. How does he keep doing it? PW chasing again. Rachel climbed a few spaces. Loving it. Very well done. All right. Let's move on to our next question. Which of these statements is true? The TikTok name originated from a type of an interpretive dance story used by monks in Tibet. You are limited to allocating no more than 500 likes per day with TikTok. A TikTok has just 1 calorie per serve, or none of the above. All right, let's have a look at the answers. You guys, most of you thought it was a dance, or none of the above. I'd love to see what that dance would actually look like. If anyone wants to do it now, I can't give you any points, but I would admire your creativity. Okay, let's have a look at that leaderboard though. See which 13% got that right. PW's on top. Very nice. It's good to see a new leader. This is very cool. All right, next question. Let's do it. On June 23rd, 1989, the University of Melbourne connected to which US state to first bring the internet to Australia? We've got California, New York, Hawaii, or Guam. So which one of these states connected to Australia to bring us the glory that is the internet? Get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It was Hawaii. Of course you thought it was California though. Everything's from California. The Red Hot Chili Peppers, sunshine, movies, all the things. All right, let's see which 33% got this right. Have a look at the leaderboard. Oh, PW maintaining the top. Elliot still on a steady 7,000. That's crazy. All right, everyone else, very well done. I think we've lost Maggie. I don't know what's going on with Maggie down there. She's, again, probably eating a soup or something. Maggie, we want you back. We miss you. All right, next question. What is the first commercially domain ever registered? Sorry, too many internet terms for my dumb brain. What was the first commercially domain name ever registered? Let's have a look at our options. Symbolics.com, web.com, 85444.net, or none of the above. If you're quick enough, you can open some tabs and check what all those websites are. All right, 3, 2, 1. Polls are closed. Let's have a look at the answer. Symbolics.com. Most of you got that right. Wow, I wouldn't have thought that. I wonder what's on symbolics.com. I guess that's the rest of my afternoon sorted. All right, let's have a look at this leaderboard. Oh, Bron is coming in 3rd place. A little climb on the leaderboard there. PW still maintaining 1st place. Very lovely. All right, we ready for our next question, everybody? What was considered the forerunner of the internet? Okay, let's have a look at our options. So we've got intraweb, radio, television, or ARPANET, or ARPANET, or ARPANET. I'm not exactly sure. All right, get your answers in on this one. 3, 2, 1. Polls are closed. Let's have a look. It was ARPANET, or ARPANET. 100% of you got that right. Very well done. But let's see who answered the fastest, if there's any changes in our leaderboard. All right, nice. PW still up the top, riding high. Ooh, I'm excited to see how this ends. We're not close to the end yet. We got a fair few more questions. All right, let's see the next one. What year did ICANN commence? What year did ICANN commence? We've got 1989, 1998, 2000, or 2001. So what year did ICANN commence? Getting those answers in. All right, 3, 2, 1. Let's see the correct answer. It was 1998. Very nice. Most of you got that one correct. Let's check in on the leaderboard and see who it was. All right, Pablo's moved into third place there. Very nice. PW still at number 1. Elliot at number 2. All right, let's see the next question. Let's get hustling. What was the most visited website in 2019? I'm hoping the answer is my Instagram account, but probably not. Okay, your options are Facebook, Twitter, Wikipedia, and Google. So which one of these was the most visited in 2019? All right, you've got 3 seconds left. Let's see which one it was. It was, of course, Google, because that's the gateway to all the other websites. Just like my Instagram. If you want to Google Beck Charlwood Instagram, you can find me there. All right, let's have a look at that leaderboard. Elliot, back on top. Very nice. Back to where we started. PW, third place. Bron, Pablo, come on, fight back. Get back into that top 3. I know you can do it. And Maggie, still out to lunch. Okay, next question. Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn are known as the inventors of spam, the fathers of the internet, the founders of Ask Jeeves search engine, and the creators of the dark web. I hope they're not the inventors of spam. Whoever invented spam, they should not be named. They should remain anonymous for their own safety. All right, let's have a look at the correct answer. They're the fathers of the internet, and most of you got that right. Yes. I can see Pablo's invited his family along. Hi. Hi, kids. Your kids are so cute. Oh, awesome. You going to help Dad with the quiz? Yeah, sick. All right, let's have a look at that leaderboard. All right, Elliot's still at the top. PW, Brian Mercer, Pablo, Andrew M. Okay, great. Awesome. Let's go to our next question. True or false? Name and IP address are the same thing. So true or false? Domain name and IP address are the same thing. Don't look at me for clues. I do not know the answer on this one. You can change your answer if you want before the timer goes off. I should have said that at the start. So you can click violently between the two, see where it lands. All right, let's have a look. False. They are not the same thing. And if I knew more about the internet, I would explain that to you. But that's your job, not mine. All right, let's have a look at who got that right. Nice. Mr. A moved up a couple of spots. Very well done, Mr. A. Elliot's still up at the top. Oof, how's it going to end? Maggie, again, still not with us. She's on another Zoom call or something. I'm not quite sure. All right, next question. Who invented Wi-Fi? All right, so we've got CERN in Switzerland, the Academic Network or DARPANet in the US, CSIRO Australia, or Bauhaus in Germany. So which one of these groups invented the internet? I mean, not internet, Wi-Fi. Sorry, different things. Oh my goodness. All right, let's have a look at the answer. CSIRO in Australia. That's us, baby. All right, leaderboard. Oh, and no changes, a slight climb in points, but still the leaderboard remains the same. All right, next question. Who was the highest paid YouTuber in 2019? Who was the highest paid YouTuber? So we've got 7-year-old Ryan Kaji, or Ryan's World, Logan Paul, Gamer Felix, aka PewDiePie, and makeup mogul Jeffree Star. So which one of these is the highest paid? It'd be good to know how much they were paid. I'm going to Google that after this. All right, let's have a look at our answers. Oh, you're going to be mad. It's 7-year-old Ryan Kaji. Wow. Oh my gosh. I'm going to... Very jealous. Oh, I'm mad. Let's just go straight to the leaderboard. I can't even think how mad I am right now. Again, remaining the same. Elliot stronghold in that first place. Very nice. Okay, let's go to our next question. Who is regarded as the father of DNS? Let's see our options. So we've got Donald Trump, Bill Gates, Al Gore, or Paul Mockapetris. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Donald Trump, Bill Gates, Al Gore, Paul Mockapetris. Which one of these is the father of DNS? And let's have a look at our answers. Nice. The only one that's not a joke answer. Very well done, everyone. Other people going for the comedy. I see you and I love it. And there's a climb in our leaderboard. PW has come up, as well as Keith going from 8th to 7th. Well done, Keith. I see you. All right, let's go to our next question. True or false? The domain LasVegas.com was sold for $9 million in 2005. The domain name LasVegas.com was sold for $9 million. I mean, that's pretty sweet. All right, true or false? What would you do with $9 million? I'd probably buy Ryan Kaji, the YouTuber. If he's probably worth more than that, you know? All right, 5 seconds on the clock. 3, 2, 1. Oh, most of you got that right. It was true. Wow. Very impressive. 78 of you got that right. Let's have a look at the leaderboard. And Elliot is back. Andrew M climbing up from 8th to 7th. Very well done. Maggie still having a nap. That's all right. You do you, Maggie. That's all good. All right, next question. Who is said to have published the first algorithm intended to be carried out by a machine? So who is said to have published the first algorithm intended to be carried out by machine? You've got Al Turing, Grace Hopper, Ada Lovelace, or Mark Twain. I'm going to be floored if it's Mark Twain. All right, 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at our answers. Oh, it was Ada Lovelace. Very nice. And most of you got that right. Nearly half of you got it wrong, though. Ooh, close. Okay, I'm interested to see how this affects the leaderboard. Let's have a look. I'm Bron. It moves into 2nd place. Ooh, only, I think around 400. I'm not good at maths, but around 400 points less than Elliot. You just need an extra 400. You climb to the top. We have a dark horse entering the competition. What is it? Dark horse? No, underdog. That's the term I'm thinking of. My goodness. All right, let's move on to the next question. And this is the last question. Oh my God. So, Bron, come on. I want to see you win this. But also, Elliot, you've kind of been killing it. I think my money might be on you. All right, what did CC tell? Sorry, let me get my words right. What is CCTLD country code domain is BD? Am I asking this question right? Can everyone else understand this and not me? Because I don't know anything about the internet. What CCLTD country code is BD? I don't think I need, that's for you guys to know the answer. Oh, what country code do I get the question now? Sorry, but that's anyway, Barbados, Bangladesh, or Burundi. So you guys know what you're talking about. I don't need to get involved in this question. You're all smarter than me. So what country code domain is BD? Barbados, Bangladesh, or Burundi? Let's have a look at the answers. It is Bangladesh, and most of you got that right, even though I asked the question completely in the wrong way. Very well done. All right, now guys, we get to find out who has won our lunchtime quiz today, a quiz thing. Are we ready to see the leaderboard? And our winner is Elliot. Oh my God. Round of applause for Elliot. You're walking out with a $500 Amazon gift voucher. Second place, we've got Bron. You were going away with a $300 Uber Eats voucher just in time for the long weekend. And in third place, Pablo, you've got a red balloon voucher for $100. You can take the kids, I don't know, whitewater rafting or whatever they've got on there. Should be good. All of our winners are, if you just contact Alex, she will take down your details and get your prizes to you. Otherwise, guys, thank you so much for playing along with Quiz Thing. My name is Beck Charwood. This has been a blast. I hope you had so much fun, and I hope you enjoy the rest of NetThing. All right, bye guys. Thank you.